read and have some knowledge on, but we'll review it, we'll go over it. Like I said before, we will introduce your instructors. We believe it's very important for all of you, like any of our students as we present, our officers and others, that they have a clear, concise understanding of who we are, not just representatives. Our officers and others, that they have a clear, concise understanding of who we are, not just representatives. Our officers and others, that I don't have that talent. I'm sorry. Have a clear, concise understanding of who we are, not just representatives. Our officers and others, that I don't have that talent. I'm sorry. Have a clear, concise understanding of who we are, not just representatives. Our officers and others, that I don't have that talent. I'm sorry. Have a clear, concise understanding of. Apologize for that. Like I was saying, it's important for you folks and any of our students as we present that they have a background of ourselves, so we know you're going to hear the topics such as person of most knowledge, right? PMKs, person most knowledgeable. That certainly you'll see at least two of us here before you that in many of the subject matters and the topics that we'll be presenting, we hold that title and we would be able to respond as experts in that field. The other title that you could hear is the subject matter expert. That's more on the technical and procedural stuff, which again, I brought instructors so that you also are aware of that hold that title and that rank as we present. We'll give you bios, but also recognizing the fact that we not only hold that, but we are recognized within our department, our agencies. We're certified and also recognized in the courts as well. We will review, obviously, policies, procedures. We'll get into the Lexipol, Power DMS, Post, to some of these other, our platforms, right? Our software, our platforms in the manner in which we present that training to our officers. So we'll give you a understanding of how our department presents that to the officers and what is expected. And then we'll conclude with not only touching base on our training division, who we are, the mandates that we are required to adhere, how we go about in presenting those mandates, and then just towards the end of it is when we'll touch on just on the legal side. That's going to bleed into the next segment and so forth. If for whatever reason this becomes so engaging, involving, because you have perhaps questions and we really want to dive into more of it, this is subject to, we're very flexible with the training, right? Because we have other segments. If we don't get to the legal side of things, I could assure you, no problem. That's what we'll begin on the next component. So it's all going to, at some point or another, be covered. So again, more for overall awareness so we know where we're getting at. This is for you. This is not just, it's a requirement, but we are here for you. What I mean by that is our goal is to ensure that you have the best understanding of what our department not only is required in the training, the platforms, the software, the programs that we utilize, and the individuals that are presenting this matter. So we want to be as transparent as possible. We do so in the training, but specifically with you folks. So it is more important for me as a training division commander to ensure that you have that understanding than to continue just to go with the training. Does that make sense? As we go, if we have to expand it, we could utilize some more time, but we believe it is just as, if not more important, that you understand that and the whys. Throughout all the training that you'll go, we'll show how we do things, but if you don't understand why are we doing what we're doing, I encourage you to ask that question. Our goal is to answer the whys for you as well. Not just how, but why are we doing what we're doing? Okay, whether it's a mandate or what our personal objectives based on our experiences. Quick overview, because I know you're aware of it, but we are here for the obvious reasons of the mandated training as posed by our Santa Ana Municipal Code Section 2-663. Put my glasses on here in a moment. So, As you're aware, prior to attending, you are required, you take an oath and execute the confidentiality agreement stating that you will be receiving this training. However, although, required 90 days after appointment, you shall receive training in relevant subject matters, including but not limited to police department's operations, policies, practices, procedures related to the following: internal affairs investigations, authorized use of force, including the use of deadly force, control devices and techniques, uses of conducted energy device, which is the taser, handcuffing and restraints, detention and arrest of persons, search and seizure of persons and property, the department's established focus of de-escalation tactics, vehicle pursuits, and the duties, responsibilities, procedures, and requirements associated with the ranks and assignments facilitated by the independent oversight director. Wow, if that's not a lot, I'm here to tell you that is a lot. And I'm sure just based on your expressions, just your facial expressions, you recognize that is a lot. And we recognize that. And that's why 16 hours, and initially you may think like, wow, that's just a long time. And the reality is that's very much condensed. A lot of all these topics, as if you could just imagine, I mean, we're talking 80, some of these 80-hour courses just to ensure that our instructors have the certifications just to present them, and some of minimal. So there is a lot of information that will be provided to you. If at any time it feels like you're drinking out of a fire hose in receiving this type of information, please, please, I encourage you to bring it to our attention. Again, we are here to ensure that you have that understanding, and we're going to do everything in our efforts to ensure that you understand it. So with that, in addition to that, as mentioned within the municipal code, this is where we're at with this requirement, and this is where you are receiving this training. In addition to that, subsection C says may but not be required to go on ride along. Some of you have reached out to me, and we have worked on it. So I know we just responded to yours, right, Mr. Carpenter? So. And so I encourage those others that if you are interested, if you don't have my point of contact, I certainly will leave it here with staff so you do get it, and I will be your point of contact to ensure that we meet that request. We believe it's an important opportunity and role to take, so you could see it first hands and be able to ask those questions. Okay, so. Before we get into bios, any questions thus far? Yes, ma'am.
On this one, back with commissioner training, number 3 on there says, attend National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement Training. Do we go somewhere for that, or what?
So that would be a good question for staff.
I can speak to that.
Oh,
Thank you.
Yes, so where we are at right now, my understanding is that this entity goes by short for Nicole, NACOLE, is that we are still working on finalizing a professional services agreement with Nicole. And I believe when Mr. Soto last spoke to this, that the training would likely be remote, that Nicole would provide this remotely. Those specific details have not been completely ironed out yet, but as far as I know, it would not require the commissioners to actually attend an off-site location for the training.
Thought we were going to get a police car ride. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Before we get into the bios of the instructors that we present, the reason why we brought the 3, because for the 16 hours, for the most part, between the 3 of us will be your primary instructors throughout the 16 hours. So it's important for you to, like anything else, introduce ourselves. You know who we are and what to expect. However, like I said before, this component of it, what you're going to find is more or less of the understanding. We're going to explain to you what our position, our role as the organization in providing this training, the programs that we utilize, the platforms, the software. If there's any technical questions during this, like, well, for example, well, why do you guys use this for? Why do we use, why is this force applied and not the other? we certainly want to answer everything, but during this first 2 blocks, this is not necessarily, we will get into those, I could assure you, throughout the 16 hours. This is more for us to be able to allow you to have that understanding of what training is provided to the officers, how we conduct the training, what the mandates are, what the software, what our platforms are, and so forth. Does that make sense? So if there are those questions, certainly we want to ensure that we answer them, make a note of it, but if at any point the instructor may say, that is a great question, I could briefly touch on it, but you will get a whole hour block on, say, for instance, that subject, that particular topic. So, all right, I'll start with myself since I'm already up here and the slide says my name, so we'll just go with that. I do have 27 years of law enforcement experience. I did not start with the Santa Ana Police Department. I started with the Riverside Police Department, where I spent just under 2 years there working patrol, assigned there. Always wanted to work Santa Ana. At the time, Santa Ana was not hiring, so therefore Riverside picked me up, and of like any applicant is going to take a position because that's what I was intended, that's what I wanted. As soon as I got the opportunity to come to Santa Ana, this was the place I wanted to be. This was the home, this is the city and agency I wanted to work for. The reputation this organization, this police department had, especially during that time, like it is today, was above and beyond the others, and I could tell you then that was my purpose of why I wanted to come to Santa Ana. Been very fortunate. I've worked a variety of assignments while here at our organization. I love our department. I love our city. I'm very passionate about the work that I do. I have had the opportunity while working field operations to work in the capacity of as a patrol officer, as a corporal, and as a sergeant, and then also as a watch commander. So I've been privileged to work all those ranks within the field operations aspect side of things. So I have that background and that experience. But in addition to that, I also spent a significant amount of time in our investigations bureau. I was very passionate about the police work and ensuring that we not only responded to calls for service, but really to have that follow through and support of our community, our victims, and that's what really interested me in working investigations. I spent several years working our family crimes unit, which was very sensitive cases with like sex crimes, child abuse, domestic violence, missing persons, and I did enjoy that assignment very well. From there, I worked our suppression team unit, at that time known as the Strike Force team, as a detective working special investigations. That allowed me to continue and enhance my career, my profession, my professional experience. And within there, I not only worked as a detective, also as a supervisor, both in the family crimes unit, also in the Strike Force unit. As well, in the investigations, I was the sergeant for our gang unit for a short period of time. And when the major enforcement team unit, known as the MET team, was implemented in 2000, I was very fortunate to be the sergeant supervisor to be selected to supervise that unit. So I did spend several years doing that. But in addition to that, I also do have experience and background in our administrative bureau. I was a training coordinator for our department for a little over 3 years. I was our backgrounds and recruitment supervisor, corporal within that administrative side of things. But while I'm doing all this, I also was very fortunate enough to work the SWAT team. I've been a SWAT member for a little over 20 years now. Worked every rank within the SWAT team, not just in the operational side of things, but also within the supervisor in the rank side. So from operator, assistant team leader, and I'm currently the assistant SWAT commander for our SWAT team. Extremely passionate about not just the tactics, but also training. I've been a trainer for well over 15 years during my experience in law enforcement. I do hold a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, and I have the opportunity to not only train our department as our current, training division commander, and being as a trainer, but also get an opportunity to travel all over the country when need be and provide training for other agencies. our department is a organization where other agencies very frequently, commonly come to us for specific type of training and/or from our instructors request that we provide that. So I'm very proud to say that we are that leading cutting-edge organization, and that's something that says is a lot to say about our city and our department. So sorry if I sound like I'm if I'm bragging, because I am, because I love this place. So yes, I will always brag to it, especially when I'm outside with other agencies. I definitely brag. And any opportunity I can get, I'm going to recruit people too. But anyways, that's a little bit about myself. Throughout the presentation, you'll probably get, you'll get more of who I am, and we'll speak to it. But if you have any questions of me, this is a good opportunity to ask. Yes, sir.
I have a question. So you mentioned that you wanted to come to work for the Santa Ana Police Department because of its reputation.
Yes,
Can
sir.
you explain Santa Ana's reputation as compared to other police departments?
So back then, like it is now, it was highly recognized as one agency that was commonly known as the leaders in community-oriented policing at that time, what we call, COP, or problem-oriented policing. During the 90s, that was obviously a huge topic, as it is still today, but when it was implemented, and recognizing that under, at that time, Chief Paul Walters and the efforts that this department took and the strive, they were leaders, cutting edge with regards to community-oriented policing, problem solving. At the end of the day, like we said, we are here to serve the community, and so therefore, that was recognized throughout the state and a national level. At that time, I didn't recognize it, I didn't see it as a national level, but certainly throughout the states. When you have my own Riverside at that time, training officers and supervisors saying, "Oh, you're interested there? Yeah, you should go there. That's a great spot. Like, if I had the time, I would, but I've already vested here." That's a good sign. So that's just one of the many, many reasons why.
Excuse me, if I could add to that, just to toot our own horns here, toot our own horns. When we started COP and it went so well here, the community-oriented policing system, people from Korea and Germany called Santa Ana here to find out how they were producing this program because it had such a good reputation. LA is the one who started it, but Santa Ana is the one who implemented it. It got all over the world. So that's pretty something to say. Did you know that?
I know that now. No, I was aware of how highly recognized in the national later on. So yes, absolutely. And that was, we're talking the 90s. To this day, you have agencies that come to our department. We host a lot of training. I could tell you, as a training division commander, we host them. We host at our department. Companies want to come and provide the training there. Agencies come over, whether it's our own instructors or outside agencies, this is where they want to come. Yes, other agencies provide it, but we are one in which anywhere we go, we could proudly, announce ourselves or, identify ourselves as Santa Ana, and immediate recognition amongst our culture, amongst the law enforcement community.
Just a follow-up question. You said we still use community-oriented policing in Santa Ana, or is that something that we did but we no longer do?
Yes, I'm sorry, absolutely. Yes. And that we're talking about, long-term problem solutions, right? Not just the current ones, but looking for long-term solutions.
I have something to add, if I may, because I've experienced this way back when COP was, started and popular and everything, with other officers in this department here, young fellas, who had never heard of it. And we would come into the police department, the old one, in fact, not this one, but the old one, and tell us that, we needed to get into such and such a room here because we're having a COP meeting, I was on the board. And they would look at me and say, "What's COP?" Well, we'd look at each other and say, "You gotta be kidding." So I had to explain it to him. And then with Walters at the time, Chief Walters. And I told him that too. And I remember George Sada, if you remember him way back.
Absolutely.
Too, he was kind of in charge at the time with different programs. And so I said to him too, I said, "Your officers are not being trained way down at the bottom." And I said, it might be a good idea to do that because it's awful when, you turn around and have an officer that say, "Well, what's COP?" Just a hint, a little
Duly noted,
suggestion.
ma'am. Absolutely.
All
Duly
your new
noted.
officers know exactly what COP was and is and still exists.
Yes.
Can you give us one example what that is of community-oriented policing?
Sure. Getting a call for service of, say, something where it's a, an area for, say, where we have, in this case, transient activities, some of the, trash debris that congregate in this particular area. And we go as an officer responding for a call for service. And you could take that action, remove the problem immediately, temporarily, but as soon as we leave, either within minutes, hours, or maybe the following day, it's a continual problem. Looking for the long-term solutions, right? So seeing that problem, seeing, hey, how could we not only deal with this now, but how could we mitigate it for on the long term? And it could be very as simple as, well, first and foremost, working with now community business partners, right? The business owners, the community, and ensuring, hey, let's meet together and saying, we have this is the issue. We recognize the fact that this is happening based on our experience on the calls, because the lighting is poor here. You have a lot of shrubbery. You have a lot of these concerns in some of these areas. This is just an example, providing them suggestions. They obviously going to take the steps if they care to trim the bushing and so forth, the bushes, put in the lighting, perhaps put surveillance cameras, conduct more patrol checks. And you'd be surprised sometimes some of the smaller efforts end up solving the problems. Working with code enforcement, coming in there and so forth. So that's just on a very small scale, but the concept is to not just be able to handle it right then and there, but also incorporating everybody, all entities, community, businesses, code enforcement, city officials, the police department, and now meeting saying, okay, this is an issue. How could we long-term solutions? And it's not always as complicated as people think. Sometimes it is, but not always. And if we could, mitigate those, on that lower level with the patrol officer level, then we're creating a much better environment for everybody.
I have a question that ties in
Can
with
I
that.
add something, just, so we don't get off the topic?
Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
When you speak about the officer directly interacting with code enforcement, is that something they're taught to do?
As a resource, just like with anything, absolutely, we recognize that we have a variety of resources, so that would be a resource that we would have.
Because typically the residents are calling code enforcement for that avenue. So I guess my question really is, do you have a avenue within the police department for the officers to get to code enforcement, or is that something they kind of have to do on their own?
So, again, without trying to get too far off topic, it's a great point, great question. We have specific from our patrol officers, the recognizing, but we have like our directed teams, right? We have the Colt team, we have some of our directives that specialize more in that. So they already have that working relationships that just like code enforcement is a resource, these units like Colt and directed are also resources for the officers. So that's how we end up linking. So they have that knowledge, whether we share that information or we utilize them to support us with contacting them. But it would be common knowledge for everybody. And even if it's a new officer doesn't know, it's upon the supervisor to share that and then work with them. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
Let's give the other commissioners a chance to ask a question. Commissioners, Berea.
Commander Lizardo, thank you so much first for providing the training for us today. So I'm really looking forward for the conversation today. You share, your experience with the Santana Police Department, and you have gone through now 3 police chiefs, I believe, if I'm correct. And so I'm very curious. And now we're in the search of a new chief of police. So that's going to be the 4. So this is more like a philosophical question, and I want to learn more from you, your perspective around where we're going as a city and where we're going now with the police department. We had different approaches to policing over the last, I believe, 2 decades with the different chief of police that we had. First, Chief Walters, also former city manager Walters, and then Chief Rojas, and now the latest Chief Valentin. And each of them face their own challenges, their own set of challenges, particularly around immigrant communities and young people, and questions about police accountability, which has led now to the creation of the Police Oversight Commission. And so on that note, kind of curious to see, as the city council is, searching, as the city searching for a new chief, what is it that your hope is for the next chief of police that is eventually selected? And what is one of the things that you're hoping this new chief brings into the department as well?
So first, I'm very proud to say that all the chiefs of police that I've worked for with regards to training have been very supportive of training. I believe that they all recognize the importance of it. And so to answer your question is just that continues supporting our division, our department, when our subject matter experts, our folks that are most knowledgeable on that, when we do present, recommendations or some of the needs, if you will, to be able to support us with that. And so far, that's what I feel that we've received throughout. We constantly have to stay in touch with what the current best practices are. That is our responsibility as an organization, but specifically maybe us in the training division side of things. And so therefore, that continuous, efforts to go there, because our folks will continue to seek out, receive the training, look for better ways, and continuously ensure that we're within the requirements and the mandates. But we could only do so much if we don't have the support of our command staff, and obviously from the chief, from our council members and so forth. And from my experience with that has been the same. So my answer to you would be is just having that continuation that we have been receiving. And while we receive that support, we're just going to continue to grow.
My last question, and thank you so much, Commander Lizardi, for sharing the historical context as well of that. Would you say that there had, throughout, the different changes that have come to the police department, and there has been some internal department procedural changes as a response to community concerns. There have been some that have come directly from city council. Would you say that there has been challenges or pushback internally from police department, rank and file officers towards these changes, or has that been a smooth journey over the last decade?
I can speak from obviously my personal knowledge and what I've seen, and when it comes to training, I feel very confident to say that most of our officers are very much eager to train, to want to learn, and so therefore, when it comes to those efforts, when there isn't, while we still have that support, and they know that their training division, their organization continuously wants to advance in that area, the support is there. Some of the stuff on the outside, we focus on what are our requirements, what are mandates. You're going to hear a lot about that throughout the presentation. You're going to see that. And I think to your question, I hope that throughout the next hours and different blocks, you'll be able to see that for yourself, and we'll be able to expand, because some of that stuff we will touch on as to how far we've gone, where we came from, where we're at, and where we're going. And I think that'll get back. So I'm not to want to answer your question, but I think you're going to see even more in detail with that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Said or Commissioner Mejia, any questions? No? Okay. Vice Chair Carpenter, go ahead.
Just one real quick question. Would you describe the impetus for training from bottom up or top down?
I'm so sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
I said, would you describe the impetus for training as bottom up or top down? You understand what I'm saying? Is it really coming down from the command level? Are the officers saying, hey, we need this?
Well, I think like with
Does that make
anything,
sense?
leadership, it always starts from the top, right? So when we have that, we have, the appropriate good leadership, it's gonna start from the top down. I could assure you that from our training staff and our folks, we have the folks. I've said this before, the beauty of this is that we have our folks here that provide that. So we have those tools available here. In a moment, you're gonna hear us talk about, ancillary positions, auxiliary, cadres, instructor cadres. We have those here. We don't, necessarily always have to reach outside. So the support, the efforts are within. And so long as the leadership, again, like I said, we have that support, our folks are full throttle, and if you will. And that's something that to a level that in a moment you'll even hear that you just, I hope that our goal is to really, inform you, but really hopefully wow you to that, because most of the time sometimes we're not aware of it. We're very proud. We get people to come and tour our department, tour our train division, tour our equipment, our services frequently from all over the agencies. What are you doing? How are you doing this? Could we model that? Could you please send us your stuff, your information? Could we send our folks to be trained by you, our instructors? And so, therefore, in that aspect, yes. So, like I said, starts from the top. The leadership supports it. Our employees are very motivated, especially on the training staff level.
Commissioner Castillo-Lawton, any more questions?
Yes. I want to go back to community-oriented policing. So earlier you mentioned that community-oriented policing involves working with members of the community, including code enforcement. You might have conversations with code enforcement as part of trying to reach or solve a particular issue that's affecting a community. Can you provide context about what those conversations generally look like?
So I will, in a moment, I'll have our deputy chief here respond to that. But even before he gets into it, these are, I said, wonderful questions. And remember what I said from the very start, how some of these questions you may have become technical. Like I said, let us give us the opportunity to give the overview. We will touch on a lot of those throughout. That's one of the examples that we will get into, more in depth and touch on, so that we could give you the overview. But again, respectfully, just to give that example, but Deputy Chief Gonzalez, if you will.
Thank you. Community-oriented policing has obviously come full circle. It's not a program. It's not something that is done just in a short period of time. It's essentially a mindset, the definition of the why behind what we do. The community-oriented policing of today is not the same as it was back in the 90s. In the 90s, there was a heavy emphasis on block captain establishments. That's where you get your comm links, where you got these neighborhood associations to get together. A lot of community involvement. What we've learned over the years to supplement that model, because that model works, keeping the communities informed, getting the communities on board to address their issues so that we can help them was vital. But some of the things that we learned over time and through, obviously community concerns too, was that there were a lot of quality of life concerns that we weren't going to be able to arrest our way out of. And so in order to effectively impact those quality of life issues, it really required a multidisciplinary response to those issues. Case in point, homelessness. We can't arrest our way out of that problem. So what we've decided to do, what we've been doing, that you guys have seen some of the good work through our COLT teams, is we are creating multi-response teams comprised of professionals in a wide variety of areas that could positively impact that situation. You got social services, police, code enforcement, public works. You essentially got an all-star team of city folks and county folks to try to combat this issue. And then to break it down even, down a little more, just yesterday, one of the council members requested a meeting with a couple of community members that were having an issue with a business that was their backyard butted up to the parking lot of this business. Some of the complaints were, drinking, smoking, using the restroom in inappropriate areas. And so they called this meeting together to see how can we help the community members. And that's surely a police issue, but it's also a code enforcement issue. And so rather than just say, hey, PD, you handle it, Alvaro and I, we followed each other. We went to the meeting, met with the community members, and we've at least outlined a plan to try to combat that issue. And it entails police response, plus communication with property owners, communication with the businesses themselves to try to curb that type of activity. So when we talk about community-oriented policing, it's not a one-time, one-size-fits-all type of operation. It's literally a mindset. It's an initiative that the department has to do to really help the community. Our community has challenges, and what I've seen in my time here with all of the work that we've done is we get our best results when we have community input. And so that's what we've done for years. We're going to continue to do, and we'll adjust as needed. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gorski.
May I add to that?
Go ahead.
a bit? Thank you. I asked him to do that, thank you very much. But what I wanted to come out was where the block captain came handy, is that it was a person that volunteered in the block to be the captain of that block, and when the police had a problem or had some news about something going on, something they were looking for, whatever was happening, they contacted that person, that block captain, to let them know that, to contact the rest of the neighbors in the block to keep your eyes out for so-and-so, this color, da-da-da-da-da-da, whether they're wearing, what they were doing. And that way, the police got to know the residents, which is what you want, and the residents got to know their police officers for that area. So that's why that really was such a good program. It still is, but at the time, it was very active and such a good program at the time because community policing, okay, they work together. Like I say, the block captain was very essential back then.
No, thank
I
you.
want to get that out there.
No, absolutely. So, I'm sorry?
Sure, go ahead, Commissioner Mejia.
I was just going to say, if we can keep it to just questions, it's because we haven't even started the training really, and the side conversations are really distracting. So I think it would be beneficial to keep it to questions only.
Okay, yes. I am going to now call upon Commander Matt Sorensen to come up and give not just a bio of himself, but just want to introduce the fact that, Commander Sorensen was the previous, training commander and really is the person who I am also learning from with regards to the platforms, the softwares, the programs and with regards to the training and how that goes. So he's really going to be the one also is going to get into the informational purposes on, for instance, like Lexapol and so forth. So without further ado, Matt, thank you.
Thank you, Commander, by the way.
Good evening, everyone. Like Commander Liz already said, my name is Matt Sorensen. I'm currently a commander with the police department. I've been with Santa Ana PD for the past 24 years, but like you see up there, I've been a police officer for almost 28 years. Like Oscar, I was a lateral transfer from another Orange County agency. As soon as my opportunity came up to move to Santa Ana, I moved to Santa Ana after about 3 years at that other agency. I might as well just get into the question before it comes up. I came here because the community I was serving was upper middle class, predominantly white, and I thought I could do more help someplace else. It wasn't a community. I'd go 12 hours with 2 calls for service a night. That's kind of boring when you're 22 years old. And I knew that Santa Ana's activity was there was a lot more activity, and there's a lot more opportunities for me to help people. So ultimately, that's why I came here. In patrol, I was an officer, I was a corporal, I was a field training officer at one point, became a sergeant, and ultimately a watch commander. Like Oscar, there's gonna be a lot of parallels between mine and Oscar's career. I'll just say I did it first. By a few months, but nevertheless, 1 minute or 5 minutes, it's still first. I was also a strike force detective when that unit was started. Once I promoted to sergeant, I spent 3 years, actually 4 years as a patrol sergeant, then moved to be the gang suppression unit sergeant. Spent a year there before I promoted to commander. Spent 3 years in the watch commander's office working graveyard, and then was transferred over to the training division, which at that time was just the training division. About 6 months in, it became the training and human resources division, and I spent 5 years there, up until just this past January, and at which point I transferred to the Metropolitan Division, which puts me in charge of the major enforcement team, the gang suppression unit, and our court liaison unit. Like Oscar, I've been on the SWAT team for about 20 years. I'm currently assigned as the SWAT commander. And then just from an education perspective, I got my bachelor's degree in business management back in 1997. And then went back to school in 2019 and got my master's degree from the University of San Diego. That's me in a nutshell. If there's not any questions, I'll have Sergeant Sontag introduce himself. All right.
Good evening. My name is Brandon Sontag. I'm a sergeant with the City of Santa Ana, currently assigned to the training division. So I have not only my current boss, but my former boss, and then obviously the deputy chief in charge as well. So a lot of my bosses sitting around. But I have 18 years of experience, not quite as much as the gentleman behind me or off to my left. A lot of that time was spent in patrol, working my way up through the ranks, but I also did some stints in the special enforcement team, Homeland Security, and then I got lucky enough in 2010 to become a defensive tactics instructor. I still hold that title. I'm still with the defensive tactics cadre, except now I run the unit. It's an ancillary assignment, kind of like Commander Lazardi mentioned. So it's something I do on top of the other assignment that I have at training. I take a lot of pride in that. I've been on the unit the longest, and I live and breathe. That's my kind of go-to. That's what I kind of do. These gentlemen behind me do a lot more of the SWAT aspect of it. Mine's more the defensive tactics aspect of it. I promoted to corporal and then to sergeant. I spent a couple years in patrol as a sergeant, then got lucky enough to get picked up, and now I'm in training full-time. I also was one of the founding members in 2017. We started as the Orange County Force Instructors Association. We are now the California Force Instructors Association. So I'm one of the founding members and a current board member on that. Again, that's ancillary stuff I do in my off-duty time. And then I also teach at the Orange County Sheriff's Academy as an ACT. We use the terminology of defensive tactics. They use ACT, which is arrest control techniques. So it's technically, I'm hired by Rancho Santiago Community College as an adjunct instructor, and I do that on my off days. So I'll be there tomorrow teaching a block of instruction there for the ACT portion of it. And then I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice with a minor in legal studies. And I also have a master's degree in public administration with an emphasis in organizational leadership. So I'll probably be handing it back off to Commander Sorensen unless there's any questions that you have at this point. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we've been at this for about an hour. Do you want to take 5-10 minutes? Or do you want me to jump right in?
I say we continue to go, and then we'll take the break after topic 2 background is completely done.
Okay. All right, so one of the things, when I took over the training division in 2018, we were in the process of transitioning our policy and procedure manual, going from an in-house policy manual that was largely the same as when I got hired in 2000 to for lack of a better term, vendor-provided policy manual, that vendor being Lexipol. It was a very arduous procedure, and you'll see that once I get into this. But a lot of what my understanding of what you're going to be asked to do as a commission is based on our policies and our procedures within our organization, whether that be enforcing our policies and procedures or reviewing them and suggesting changes, whatever the case may be for those policies. So I thought it important for us to start with a foundational knowledge of kind of what policies are and what the purposes are. So the base purposes of policy, and this is more of a textbook definition, is that they define what employees can expect from our organization, right? It lays the platform of, Sergeant Sontag, this is what you can expect from the Santa Ana Police Department. It also defines what the organization expects from employees. So we expect you to act professionally. It lays those things out in very specific terms. It also outlines what the community can expect from us as officers and from the organization as a whole. So that's the overarching purpose of having policies within an organization. No different than in the private sector as it is in the public sector. It's just that the policies may be a little bit different depending on the specialty. For lack of a better term, the best, easiest definition of a policy is it explains the why behind what we do as an organization. Then we get into procedures. Excuse me. The purpose of procedures, specifically to us, is our procedures are specific to the Santa Ana Police Department. We don't buy our procedures from an outside vendor. We author these in-house, largely based off of the policies we purchased, but now we need to be more specific as to how we're going to do this as the Santa Ana Police Department. So it provides our personnel with the how. So policies are the why, procedures are Here's why you're doing what you're doing. Here's how exactly you're going to do it, if that makes sense. It's more of an instruction manual than the policy manual is in and of itself. The step-by-step IKEA booklet that you pull out and you can't read all the pictures. All right, so where do we get our policies from? Like I said, we purchase our policy manual from a company called Lexipol. All right, 90% of California police departments use Lexipol. Every single Orange County law enforcement agency is purchasing their policies from Lexipol. What are some advantages and why do we do it? Which is really important to understand, is one aspect of it is the cost-effective piece of it. So right now we spend $30,000 a year for our PD policy manual and for daily training bulletins. And I'll get into what the advantages of it, what the daily training bulletins are, because they're an add-on to the policy manual that we just started in 2019. Basically, we achieved the same level if we wanted to achieve the same level of service and produce policies internally, we'd be looking at a minimum of 2 staff members, 1 attorney and probably 1 sworn police officer, if not a sworn police sergeant, sworn police commander. And I was being very conservative on this cost, but you're looking at roughly $300,000 annually. And at that, again, I was very conservative because that's probably only going to cover salary, not pay and benefits for those 2 personnel. So you can see the balance there. $30,000 versus $300,000 makes a big difference. The other advantage is that they have, because we're paying them and every single other agency is paying them to buy these policies, they can afford to have a large pool of attorneys on hand that are constantly monitoring legislative updates, which ultimately legislative updates typically will amount to policy updates for us. So they've got this large cadre of attorneys and risk managers, because ultimately your policies and procedures are also risk management tools, solely monitoring and then authoring policy updates. We get our policy updates are provided to us automatically through Lexipol's web-based platform, which is called the Knowledge Management System, or what we refer to as KMS. So generally speaking, our policy updates, the floods of policy updates will happen typically around July and typically around December, and that's because that coincides with the legislative calendar for the state. So that's when new laws are put into place or are going to go into effect. And now Lexipol is proactive. They send out our policy updates long before the policies actually go in, or the new laws will go into effect. So we have time to vet those policies, get them pushed out to our people, so that come January 1, if that's the time that the law takes effect, that policy is already in place and our people have already been trained on it. KMS also provides us the platform by which we publish our policies. And when we publish a policy, every employee gets a notification, an email notification that there's policies that they need to acknowledge, and it requires an electronic signature that employee read and acknowledges that they received and read the policy that was pushed out to them, creating a paper trail essentially so that we can audit who has or has not reviewed policies. And those audits are done on a monthly basis. The other major advantage of Lexipol, and one of the things that's come up in topics about Lexipol is, well, you're buying boilerplate policies. Yes, we are buying boilerplate policies. We are not publishing boilerplate policies. It's 100% customizable. There's nothing requiring us to use the policy that they put out. In fact, there's some policies that we wrote internally because we didn't like what Lexipol had, but writing one policy is a lot better than writing 164 policies. Right? So just to give you an example, approximately 40% of our policy manual has been altered from what Lexipol initially provided. So the next question becomes, well, what kind of alterations? Sometimes it's terminology changes where, because they're writing a policy manual for something for the entire state, their designation may be police captain, whereas our designation's deputy chief. Well, if I change police captain to deputy chief within the KMS system, it's going to log that as a modification to the policy. Other policy changes may be, for example, our immigration policy, which because we're a sanctuary city, because we have the Sanctuary Policy Advisory Committee, that policy is 100% handwritten by us, but then added into the KMS system so we can get the luxury of formatting and the auditing system. So what's it look like when we were doing the Lexipol implementation? So we actually started this process back in 2012. When I took over in 2018, we had only published about 3 Lexipol policies. And that's because we were taking the necessary time to vet each individual policy, change them based on our department needs, based on our community's needs, based on input from the community in some cases, based on input from the ACLU in some cases. There was a lot of fingers in the pie helping us get there. So we finally hit the full swing of the transition in 2018. In 2012, there actually wasn't a web-based platform, so kind of a good thing in those 6 years while we were waiting to fully do this, they established the web-based platform, which really expedited the process quite a bit. We ultimately finished the full manual publication in about 2020, early 2021. And our manual includes 183 policies and 99 handwritten procedures. So all of those procedures are 100% created in-house. So again, why we do what we do is 183 policies, and then what we physically do is 99. And you may ask why there's not the same number of procedures as policies, because sometimes they're not necessary. For example, we have a policy on the wearing of seatbelts. I do not need a procedure showing my officers how to put a seatbelt on. They've been doing that since they've been riding in the car with their parents, so there's no procedure for that. So where does the content from our Lexipol policies come from? Just like our previous policy manual, it comes from federal law, from state law, and then best practices. Well, Lexipol, because they're a large organization and they're tied in with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, from the Police Executive Research Forum, they'll pull best practices from those organizations. Because those are the people, those are the folks out there doing it every day, testing theories in the field, and then putting them into practice within their organizations to see how their communities react. Every community is not the same. Every community, what's good works in Santa Ana doesn't work where I used to work before. And what works where I used to work before doesn't work in Santa Ana because the communities are different. It just is what it is. So we use best practice as a baseline. Hey, these are some things that we've tried and have been tried across the country. Start here as your platform, and then modify it towards your community's needs. Because there's no point in completely reinventing the wheel. Let's just see if we can get it to roll better within the confines of the city of Santa Ana. And then they also draw some of their best practices from risk management organizations. So just for example, insurance companies, they'll pull information from insurance companies. One of the founders of Lexipol is actually a gentleman by the name of Gordon Graham. He's a former deputy commissioner of the California Highway Patrol, but he's also an attorney and recognized risk management professional. So he's one of the co-founders and recognized that at the end of the day, policies and procedures are ultimately a risk management tool. There is no way we can write policies that will completely eliminate risk in what we do. The only way to do police work or any work in reality completely risk-free is to not do the work. Sit on the couch at home and I'm not gonna get hurt. But if I come to work, any number of things could happen and I'm gonna get hurt. Same thing kind of applies within any organization. More specifically, the law enforcement organization in general is a risky business. So how do we implement policies? And this kind of goes back to why it took us so long to get this going. So step one is we received the policy from Lexipol. Once we received the policy from Lexipol, and the way it would work is I would receive the policy from Lexipol in the training division. And let's just say that the policy, to give you an example, is domestic violence. I am not an expert in the investigation of domestic violence. That's never been my field of expertise. Yeah, I've investigated domestic violence as a patrol officer, but I'm not a domestic violence investigator assigned to the Investigations Bureau. So I go to that person, who's our subject matter expert, and say, hey, review the policy and see what they have in here. Make sure that they're hitting all the stuff procedurally that we need to be doing as an organization. Make sure that everything, the verbiage, fits how we operate within the County of Orange and within the City of Santa Ana. The subject matter expert will review the policy, maybe make some additions, maybe make some deletions, maybe make some recommendations as to how we should change this. Then it would come back to me. This would also be the stage at where we would reach out and get community input if it was applicable. Again, seatbelt policy, we don't really need to get community input. I think the community, all of us would agree, the community would agree we should be wearing our seatbelts. But for example, on our body-worn camera policy, we got community input on that in the drafting of the body-worn camera policy. Once I get it back from the police, from the subject matter expert, it goes to our police legal advisor. Our police legal advisor reviews it it conducts strictly legal review. Is the right terminology, if there's some state mandates in there, are they properly being represented in our policy? If there's federal mandates, same thing. Make sure that just everything's above board from a legal perspective. Once I get it back from the police legal advisor, it gets forwarded to our senior management team, which consists of our chief of police, or actually the senior management team, absent the chief of police at this point. So it's all of our deputy chiefs, the deputy chief of the Field Operations Bureau, Administrative Bureau, and the Investigations Bureau, and then in some cases, our jail administrator. Once they review it, they get to provide input. Sometimes it's just a review session. Yeah, it looks good, because it's already been vetted to these levels. Then it comes back to me. If there's an issue with a policy potentially affecting working conditions or pay wages, anything like that, then I send it to the bargaining unit. And then we seek an opportunity to meet and confer if it's something that's gonna affect working conditions. For example, going back to body-worn camera, there was a lot of meet and confer back and forth with the bargaining unit over body-worn cameras. Once we get that all squared away, then it goes to the chief of police for final approval. The chief approves it, and then I publish it via the KMS system. And then I also post it on our department's website. At that point, it's published. We're kind of done until any potential updates come up in the future. Some policies get updated, some don't. Largely, the most common policy updates we see are in search and seizure, domestic violence, sexual assault investigations are some of the ones where we get fairly regular updates, and use of force. Virtually every year, there's an update to the use of force policy in some way, shape, or form. So now that this book is published, right now we're working 95% of the effort is just on policy updates. December gets to be a really busy time because most of our new laws come out and go into effect January 1. So usually we'll get hit with about 17 policy updates about December 13th or so. And then you got to spend some hours sifting through there. So once we get a policy update, usually it's going to be driven by a change in law or that affects existing policy. Lexipol sends us the policy. We get an email alert saying, hey, there's policy updates waiting for you. The updated policy version of the policy is reviewed by the manual administrator. Now that's Commander Lizardi. He'll review it. Sometimes they'll do updates on occasion that are just grammatical changes. They add a comma or something like that. If they're very minor changes like that, where it's just grammar changes, generally speaking, we accept the update and we go ahead and push it out and publish it. If it's a change as a result of a change in law, the policy update will get sent to the police legal advisor, again, for that legal review. Once the police legal advisor is good with it, we go ahead and publish it and send it out to our troops, and then place the updated version, pull the old version down off of our website, put the new version up on the website. And that's all I have for policies and procedures.
Okay, thank you very much. So that we're not talking over each other, I'm gonna call each commissioner, and then if you could please ask the questions that you have, and then I'll go around once, and if you want to ask another round of questions, I'll go ahead and do that. That way we're not kind of going back and forth asking questions. So who would like to go first? Commissioner Mejia, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll put this a little bit down so I can be clear. I understand what policies and procedures are, but I kind of would like to get a little bit clarification or maybe an example.
Okay.
As to, like, maybe it can be DV or use of force, as to the law passes, right? So you have, like, sorry, it's bothering me. You have a legal case, so you have like legal writing into what you can and cannot do. And then from that, you're going to determine the policy best to enforce the law. And then your procedure is going to tell the officer how exactly they're going to implement that, right? Can you maybe give us an example of when use of force, where officers have agency in use of force, so that, because that's going to be mainly what we're going to be discussing in the commission, and I would like to have a little bit more clarity on the policies and procedures pertaining to that. If that's going to be discussed later, we can hold off, but if not.
So I believe we will get in depth into specifically the use of force policy, if that's what you're asking. You know, for use of force, that gets broken up into a lot of different procedures, because there's different force options that we have. So basically, there's a procedure for every single force option. And I'm relatively certain, Oscar, that we're going to be getting into very in-depth in the
Okay.
use of force in future iterations of this.
Okay, then we can discuss it then.
Okay.
That's fine. Thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner Perea.
Sorry, I have my set of notes. But thank you, Sergeant Sontag, for the presentation. Sorry, Commander Sorensen.
All right.
Like trying to keep track of my names. You mentioned that, I believe it was like early 2000 when the transition happened from in-house policies to then outsourcing it to a third-party vendor. Is that correct?
Yes, it began in 2012.
2012. And what prompted that change?
Largely because we looked at our policy manual and saw that a significant number of the policies were out of date. And once you start looking at that and really assessing what's the level of work going to be, when I think at that time we had probably close to the same number, if not maybe 5 or 10 fewer policies. So, upwards of 160 policies that everyone needed to be gone through by hand, versus, hey, let's just start from scratch and go with a company that's been vetted by several different police agencies. It becomes an issue of, we could have done it, it could have been done, but I guarantee you that to this day, we would still be working on that from 2012.
And the stated here that 90% of the law enforcement agencies in California use Lexipol. What are the other 10% law enforcement agencies do?
Some do it in-house, and then the classic example with regards to that is LAPD does their own policies in-house. Last time I looked at their manual, and don't quote me on this, it was something like 25,000 pages, and there's a policy basically on how to tie your shoes. They go very in-depth. LA County Sheriffs would have their own policy manual. It's a lot of other sheriff's departments, very large police departments. At the end of the day, the reality is that while we look at Santa Ana as being a big police department, on a national scale, we are not. We are considered a mid-sized law enforcement agency. And it just comes down to manpower and the ability to keep updating this stuff. LAPD has their whole Office of Constitutional Policing that they can use, that's probably 15 or 20 people just to analyze their policy manual, and that's all they do every day. Whereas, you look at our department, we have 14 sworn command staff, whereas Anaheim PD has 17 command staff. So it just comes down to cost-benefit analysis And that's the reason why the larger agencies do it, because they can.
And with that, and I'm trying to just understand more, right, the role of Lexipol in terms of the work that we, the police department does here in Santa Ana, particularly because there has been a lot of concerns from community members around Lexipol. And I myself have concerns regarding Lexipol just because of my line of work. We have encountered issues and incidents in which other police departments, did the copy and paste in their policies manual, and that has led, unfortunately, to transfers of community members to ICE when it shouldn't have happened. And I appreciate that you're mentioning that that's not the case here. The policies get vetted, they get customized, and there's someone here in the police department that makes sure that it's in compliance with our local ordinances. But I'm curious as to since this change took place recently, if there were considerations at the beginning to immediately go seek a third-party vendor or go to the route of having this in-house. Was there a conversation in those initial considerations?
So I hope I didn't underplay this, but part of the reason why it started in 2012 and didn't even really get going until 2018 was because those discussions were being had amongst the command staff. Now, I wasn't privy to them at the time. At that time, I wasn't command staff, but I heard the conversations that were going on. And one of the big things the arguments that was made against Lexipol was, why would we buy them when we could do it ourselves? The counter argument to that was, yeah, we can do it ourselves, but we're not doing a very good job now. What's to say we're going to be doing it better in the future? See where I'm coming from? So it's very beneficial. Those conversations very much were had, and there was a lot of cost-benefit analysis that was conducted, and ultimately we decided, let's go with Lexipol and use that as our base foundation, but we will customize it to meet the needs of our organization, our city, and our community, because it's better to start with something in the base than start from scratch.
And at that time, I imagine that a lot of the conversations took place internally within the department, and at some point went to city council, and city council was like, we're just gonna, go ahead with this recommended contract. And fortunately at that time, we did not have a police oversight commission that could be a co-thinking partner with the police department around the best way to go about this. And I understand that a lot of this is also a political decision around budgets, so which is out of your hands. But I think one of, as we gone through the trainings and as the commission dives into the policies and procedures, I think that's something that I'm hoping we understand, better, because part of what the reasoning has been is that this is a risk in a way, try to decrease the risk of liability. And the cost of $30,000, I believe that's per year, right? That this contract costs sounds very enticing. But then, looking at the amount of millions of dollars that we have paid out on settlements, more than $10-15 million over the last decade or so, kind of puts this in, raises eyebrows around, whether we should just do the cost internally and take that, But yeah, appreciate that. So those are my initial questions and comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Said, any questions? Okay, go over here. Commissioner Castillo-Lawton.
Yes, hi. So I have a question about Lexipol. You mentioned that Lexipol carries a number of advantages, right? Are there any disadvantages to using Lexipol?
The primary disadvantage is that we have to actually pay real money to buy it. When we're paying in-house folks, it's just kind of numbers on a spreadsheet. It's not an actual check going out. I haven't found any disadvantages, and I'm intimately familiar with using the program. Some of the disadvantages, the KMS system can be cumbersome. It's not very intuitive from an author's standpoint. So there's a steep learning curve there. It took me about 6 months to get really good at using the system. And there have been instances where we've received policy updates that were inaccurate Fortunately, we do this extensive vetting system, and we caught them, fixed them, and then notified them of the inaccuracies that were within their policy. Because at the end of the day, you know, I'm a firm believer that not only do I owe everything I do to serve the community of Santa Ana, but I also serve the law enforcement community, and I'd hate for another law enforcement officer to get in trouble, create risk for their organization because they followed a policy that, and it wasn't grossly inaccurate, don't get me wrong, but there was some challenging wording in there because I don't know why it was there, but we fixed it, and fortunately, because of our vetting system, we fixed it on our end.
Okay. Does Lexipol have competitors?
No, they don't.
They don't have any competitors?
No, on occasion, I mean, there are certain entities that you can go to, IACP being one of them, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and you might be able to find a use of force policy. You might be able to find a de-escalation policy. But there is no other competitor out there that offers an entire policy manual. To where, because I'll be honest with you, when we look at our policy regarding industrial injuries, those are all governed, and there's no reason for us to create a new policy on industrial injuries when that is the same up and down the state. It doesn't matter what your organization is. It doesn't matter what your community is. This is how we have to handle industrial injuries. And that's what 95%, I shouldn't say 95, at least 80% of our policies are based in things that have to be done: industrial injury, sick leave, seat belts. I keep harping on that. Tobacco use, things like that. You know, when it comes down to the policies that, I mean, at least based on my experience, the community would be involved in: use of force, pursuit policy. Those are what I expect this commission to be looking at, and those are the discussions we can have in the future to modify those policies to meet our community's needs. But why start from scratch when I can take this one from Lexipol and modify it to meet our community's needs? At least I'm starting from a base. Because there is some stuff that's legally defined by the state that regardless of what your community needs are, this can't be changed because this is either state or federal law type thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is Lexipol a law firm?
No.
Okay. What's the difference between Lexipol and a law firm?
Lexipol doesn't do any litigation.
Okay.
So they create policies.
Could you have hired a law firm to write the policies for the police department?
I suppose we could. I'm not aware of any law firms that do that. You know, one of the interesting things is one of the things that the co-founder of Lexipol says is, if you want to get your policies put in place, don't hire any lawyers. And part of that's because of recognizing the fact that this job is risky, and there's no, you know, every attorney I've ever dealt with wants to eliminate risk completely, and that's just not the world we live in. So risk managers are better. I'm not aware of any law firms. Granted, I haven't researched it, but I've spent a lot of time doing policy and procedure stuff that do that kind of work. I'm sure you could contract them out to review what you've already authored, but at the end of the day, we would still have to author the base policy and then pay somebody to do a legal review of it.
Although they're not, they do have a team of attorneys that are work in support of that with risk management. So they are vetted by a team of attorneys. And when you have such a large capacity, even to your point, sir, to have our own staff doing that work, aside from the fact that it's just a tremendous know it to be true, and it's only getting more and more. We risk the fact that it's like trying to catch, these plates, right? You're going to do the best you can. You don't want to drop a plate. And so we risk the likelihood of that. And just like, Murphy's Law comes in, that's when perhaps one of our officers is going to be involved in an incident. And now in litigation for us, civilly, we did not have that one up to speed based because of the fact. So we're really risking that side of it as well, and getting the support to help us while still, just like Commander Sorensen mentioned, while still having the ultimate responsibility to look at that. Even though that's a lot of work, it's a lot more manageable. So the likelihood of us, you know, in context of dropping these plates, it's a lot less. That makes sense? And that's where we look at it. If we don't, absolutely, but it would require a team. Talking a fully staffed team like they have in order to ensure that we're, and within that, like you said, we may catch one here or there with the professionals. So that's, you know, really a lot of the value to that. So to your point, you do have them and then comparison.
I guess what I'm thinking is, you said 90% of, I think it was the police departments in California use Lexipol, right? If you're talking about risk management, isn't there a risk magnifier potentially of having the same policies that 90% of other police departments have in the state? Meaning, if a policy gets challenged in another police department, right, implements one of Lexipol's policies, and it gets challenged and found to be unconstitutional or violate someone's rights or whatnot, if Santa Ana is using the same policies as everybody else, that exposes the city of Santa Ana to significant risk potentially, doesn't it?
I'm not an attorney, but here's what I'll say to that. Generally speaking, when we see, based on my experience just as a police officer, when we see challenges to legal aspects of policy, it's basically a challenge to the existing law, i.e. how the law was applied by that individual organization. So I haven't experienced, and maybe the deputy chief can chime in on this because he's done more with the city litigation side of things, but I haven't seen a lawsuit that we've been involved in where it's been a challenge to one of our policies versus a failure to adhere to one of our policies by whomever the officer or department member was that engaged in that activity.
But there could be a situation where there is a policy or procedure that directs somebody to do something that results in a violation, right? So like, if you had a procedure that directed a police officer to search somebody's car without a warrant or something like that, facially, that law could be challenged, no?
That would, but now we're talking about a procedure that directs somebody to do something, and if that's a procedure, we've created it in-house. Lexipol didn't create it.
The City of Santa Ana Police Department creates all procedures in-house?
Yes.
Okay, what if it were a policy? What if there were a policy that like wearing a seatbelt, that sounds not like, that doesn't sound like a why question, that sounds like a do this question, right? And so if there were a policy that were like wearing a seatbelt, but it directed a police officer to do something that violated somebody's rights, for instance, and I'll go back to the example that I gave about potentially magnified risk. If the city of, I don't know, San Francisco or something had a policy, right, that the city of Santa Ana also has, and the city of San Francisco gets sued because they have that policy, then all of a sudden, Santa Ana is going to be a target too because we have the same policy.
Yeah, and potentially what ends up happening there, and I could, quite honestly, we could what if it all day long. Generally speaking, what I've seen happen is, so say San Francisco, using your example, San Francisco gets sued. What ends up happening is our attorney networks that we engage in that do police department defense, city defense, we get legal updates and updated case law, and our police legal advisor is very good at researching and getting those updates. And this has happened in the past, actually, fairly recently, where she says, specific to, I think this one was Public Records Act stuff, where LAPD got sued for a Public Records Act thing. She caught on to it, brought it to my attention, we sat down and we modified our policy based on what current events were going on. Yeah, and that's not to say that we couldn't do that if we were doing it in-house, but at least we had the base already there to move and make modifications as needed, depending on what current events are going on.
Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Goronski? Go ahead.
I just wanted to kind of go on with what this gentleman said, the commissioner said. If you look at it like with, I say, San Francisco, they had the same laws or so, but San Francisco got, say, let's say, caught with it. Wouldn't Santa Ana is that a state law? What the example he was giving, or you were giving it, was that a state law where every department in the state would have to do what it said? If it's only a city law, then why would Santa Ana have to do it too? Or are you just mending your fences behind you?
I don't think I understand the question.
If I may, the short answer to your question is, yes, there is potential. The key here, though, that makes Lexipol beneficial for us is their robust legal team and our connections and networking with that legal team. Plus, we have in-house city attorneys. We have a police legal advisor whose main job is to continually monitor litigation, ongoing litigation, new litigation. And if there is a conflict and a potential, we have the ability to suspend or reevaluate a policy. The idea here is that Lexipol really does provide that benefit because they also have a legal team to litigate whatever policies being challenged. And the basis for our policies are all centered on federal, state laws. And so that's why, most of the like something that's being challenged up in San Francisco for a policy which is centered on state law, it's going to impact us here regardless because our policies are centered on federal and state law. So, but it's that robust connection between their legal team, our legal advisor, and really just that communication through these professional organizations that will put us on alert, put the brakes on, and then we reevaluate based on what's going on with the case, if that helps.
That's what I was getting at. Is it a state law? In other words, if it's a state law, you have to do what it says. Not each individual police department throughout the state can do as they please with a specific law.
Correct. If it's a
Thank
state
you.
or federal mandate, then,
Right.
which is why, I mean, generally speaking, when we get policy updates, it's because there's been changes in state and federal law. And that's why we jump on those right away. Absent those alerts, I'll be honest with you, as the guy who managed the policy manual for 5 years, if I didn't have those alerts coming in from Lexipol, there's a lot of times I would have been lost and not known that these changes had even been made. But fortunately, I had somebody, for lack of a better term, electronically poking me in the ribs going, hey, pay attention to this stuff. We need to change it when you got to get up to speed.
Vice Chair?
Yeah, just real quick on the Lexipol. It seems to me that Lexipol is kind of equates to like an ASTM standard or ASME standards. All the police departments probably nationally do things a very similar way. You conduct an arrest the same way that they would in Montana or New Jersey or what have you, correct? And your training as an officer, if you're trained locally here, you're trained in a certain procedure. I don't care what department you go to. You can go through the Golden West College training there, and if you go to Riverside, your training is still valid, correct? So to me, it seems that I fully appreciate why you would use Lexipol, because again, it's like an ASTM standard or something like that. If you're familiar with those, they tell you how to do things in a manufacturing perspective. So I can understand why you would want to go that route, and I can fully appreciate why you would do your own little procedures on top of that, just like the company that I work for, we had in addition to. So that sounds like what you have here. I think that if I'm understanding this correctly, Lexipol is a great base, correct? And you can build on it, you can modify it, it's a living document, you can do as you see fit for your particular community. So to me, that seems like it's a good thing. To your point, I can understand why you would be concerned about litigation, but you're not going to avoid that no matter what you do. As an attorney, you're fully aware I can litigate anything I so choose.
We do our best just to avoid it.
No, I understand, and
At the end of the day.
I think that's the nature of the business, right? I mean, I don't care what business you're in, the business I came from, there's always going to be somebody that's going to litigate you. It's just a fact of life. So I personally don't see a big issue with Lexipol. To me, it makes a lot of sense because, again, I think all policing is, correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of standardized, right? Every police department is not arresting people differently.
I wouldn't necessarily say that, but all police departments in the United States have a foundational document that we have to follow, and that's the Constitution.
Yes, and your training, I would assume, is very similar too, correct? I mean, how things go about.
The training is more regional. The
Okay.
way we do things in Southern California isn't necessarily the same way things are done in Northern California. Everybody in Orange County is trained to a certain level because everybody in Orange County either goes through Golden West Police Academy or the Orange County Sheriff's Academy.
Exactly.
That's one of the beautiful things about Orange County in general is our interoperability up through amongst all the law enforcement agencies is second to none. LA County doesn't have it, Riverside County doesn't have it, San Bernardino County doesn't have it, Orange County has it.
And to your point about LA, I mean, quite frankly, I don't care who you are, you cannot remember 2,500 pages of procedures and policies. That's, to me, is a moot point. I mean, that's counterproductive in every aspect. The only concern I have for you guys is, there's two actually, how much influence does the union have over the policies? Can they actually, if you say, hey, I want to do this, and they can say, nah, we ain't doing that?
It depends on what the topic is. Now, we're obligated if a policy has an effect towards working conditions, we have an obligation to meet and confer. We do not have an obligation to meet and agree. So at the end of the day, as long as we've met our duty to meet and confer, at the end of that meet and confer, if we can't come up to an agreement, we can say, okay, we agree to disagree, but now it's management rights, and we're gonna go ahead and move forward with this for these reasons. As long as we have a good foundational basis for why we're doing what we're doing and a good solid justification. But at the end of the day, it's still better for us to meet and confer and come to some middle ground on things.
Understood. And at the command staff, are all union members also?
Different union.
Okay,
Yeah, so everybody sergeant and below is a member of the Police Officers Association.
Okay.
Everybody commander and above, with the exception of the chief of police, are a member of the Police Management Association.
okay. And does the Police Management Association get involved with these policies and procedures? Do you have to take it to them also?
Well, so interestingly enough, when I was doing all the policies and procedures for the department, I was the Police Management Association president, and we didn't get involved at all.
Okay, all right. And one other thing, you mentioned that you go to the SMEs for these kind of tweaks or what have you. How much involvement does the rank and file have in the policies and procedures? Procedures, I would just, not policy, but procedure.
So generally speaking, a lot of our SMEs are the rank and file.
No, I appreciate that, but in your example, you went to the SME for the domestic violence. Okay, I can understand that, but in general, do you actually try to get input from the rank and file? Because sometimes that's very valuable.
Quite honestly, it really depends on what the policy is and how much freedom of movement we have within that policy. You know, if a lot of the policy is state and federally mandated, not to sound callous, but it really doesn't matter what the rank and file
No, I
thinks.
understand.
It doesn't really matter what I think, because it's state and federally mandated. We're gonna have to do it. But on certain things, certain procedures, we have gone to the rank and file for, one example would be when we implemented a procedure on body armor, on external rifle-rated body armor. You know, I went to some roll calls and got some input as to when this should be used, when it shouldn't be used, largely because I wasn't in the field at that time and I needed to get their perspective as to what made sense.
Understood. I think I had one more question. I think that was it. Thank you very much.
So it really seems like Lexipol is really comes in handy with new policies, correct? So let's suppose that this year California doesn't make up any new laws. Will Lexipol really, would they get paid this year, or how does that work?
Yeah, they still get paid because we still have the web-based platform. And one thing I forgot to mention, another advantage of the web-based platform is that it's on everybody's phone. So they have access to every policy and procedure no matter where they're at. The other thing I forgot to mention was the daily training bulletins. I told you I was gonna mention it, but I forgot. That's part of our contract. And what the daily training bulletins are is every month they push out a for every day of the month, they push out a scenario that's policy-specific and then a series of questions. And these are all done either via the app or on the computer. And essentially, it's training on every policy. Where that really comes in handy is because, you know, we do regular training on use of force. We do regular training on response to calls for service, which is mostly driving and emergency driving. We do regular training on pursuit policy, foot pursuit policy. What we don't do training on a regular basis is how do you report a workers' comp injury? What constitutes as a workers' comp injury? And those are the topics that we really, what we'll end up doing is, because they give us one for every day of the month, not every person in our department works every day of the month. So generally speaking, everybody works at least 16 days a month. So we go through the daily training bulletins. We pull out the 16 most relevant, and then we'll push out 16. So everybody has to do one every day of their work week, but not every day of the month. And that provides them the training that can be some more obscure policies that you read once and you never read again. But at least they're getting trained up on it. They're getting reminded of the policy. Way it runs down, it gives you like a scenario, you know, Officer Jane met Officer Doe, and this is what happened. Then it gives you a policy analysis of the scenario. Then it gives you a question, you know, under X circumstances, can you do A, B, C, or D? And it all gets logged, it's all electronic, and we have a training log now. Each one equates to about 15 minutes of training.
To take one example, I know there was a recent lift on cruising. So is that something that Lexipol is helping you guys out with, changing that policy now that that law has changed?
So we actually didn't have an anti-cruising policy. So there's nothing to change because the law got changed.
Okay. And then to kind of piggyback on Vice Chair's question in terms of the union having influence on policy, what about the council? Is the council able to have influence on policy, let's say like illegal street vending, right? Let's say that the majority of the council does not want you guys to enforce that law. Is that something that they have the authority to do?
I don't want to speak from a legal perspective because I really don't know the answer to that question. What I can tell you from an internal policy and procedure, we don't have policies that say you shall do this type of enforcement versus that type of enforcement. They're more overarching than that. What you're describing there would be more of a directive that would be input provided to the chief of police, through the city manager to the chief of police. The chief of police does a directive, which is outside of our actual policy manual, but it's still enforceable as if it was a policy or a procedure once it's put in place.
Can I add to that for you? Isn't street vending code enforcement more than it is police?
It is, but we can still,
Can help out.
we can write tickets because it's a municipal code violation. We can take enforcement action on it. But yeah, generally speaking, that
Code
would be more of
enforcement usually that
a code
handles it.
enforcement thing. But I think you were just using that as an example.
Okay, so we'll do one more question around if anybody else has an additional question, and then we'll take a break.
Yeah, I have one more.
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Commissioner Mejia.
So I'm curious, and maybe I misunderstood, so maybe more clarification. So obviously the law is a law, state, federal, and then you get this policy manual. And then you mentioned earlier that because different communities have, communities are different, or your words, your policies might look different or your procedures might look different.
Either or.
And can you clarify what that means? Like, what do you mean by that? when you say
So I'll give you an example. For our vehicle impound policy, California state law says that we can impound anybody's vehicle if they're driving without a license. Our policy says we cannot do that. We have to give people an opportunity to have somebody come and pick up the vehicle. So that was an instance where that was modified before undocumented individuals could get a driver's license. So based on community input and, hey, it's not fair, we can't get a license, so why are we getting our cars towed for 30 days? Costs a lot of money. It's very detrimental to we wrote it in our policy that while California law says this, we can make our policies and procedures more strict than the law. We cannot make it more lenient than the law, but we can always make it more strict. And that's an instance where we did that, was for our towing and impound policy.
Yeah, great, thank you for that. I think that's a really good example of thinking and being thoughtful about the community. Is there anything that you think sometimes the policy manuals might be not as thoughtful to the community needs, whether it's like Santa Ana is like right, there's a large poverty community, a documented community, but also racial. So are there any instances where that might be detrimental instead of like actually assisting the community in any of the policies?
Can't think of anything offhand. I mean, it's kind of put me on the spot.
Sorry.
Right here. Like I said, the manual is 182 policies deep. But those are things we look at when we're reviewing the policy. In a lot of times, for example, our cite and release policy went to the Sanctuary Policy Advisory Committee, and we did make some recommendations and some changes to that policy based off of their recommendations. We didn't make other changes. And I'll be honest with you, one of the changes they wanted us to make was to cite and release people for felony violations. And legally, we cannot do that. So they were asking for us to do something illegal. And I understand the intention behind it. However, we can't break the law either. You know, so, but we did change some things in our cite and release policy based off of their input that made it more advantageous to the people we were contacting. And in that they were getting, now they have to be issued a citation versus transported to jail and then released on a citation.
Great, thank you. And then more of a point rather than a question. I think I really appreciate that, that the department is doing that. And I think something to think about that is sometimes subconsciously right is that sometimes we think about communities differently. And in that we sometimes think of communities who need safety and then communities who we don't feel, not we, but like maybe sometimes certain people might not feel safe for. So just keeping in mind when we think of communities or when, you know, the department thinking of communities, are they thinking that all communities also need safety, right? And they don't leave maybe out some communities that might need safety but have been hotspot policing per se. But rather a comment, you'd have to answer that. Thank you.
Right.
Commissioner Pereira.
Commander Sorensen, you just took me down memory lane about all these conversations we've been having with the police department for over a decade now. I remember being, I think it was under Chief Rojas that the change around impoundment of cars was done. I remember the community conversations roundtable that we had, and we were like, nope, you gotta change that. We gotta change it. And also as part of the Sanctuary Advisory Board, so I think, you know, there's been a lot of work that we have done. And it's more, you know, I understand, you know, the role that Lexicopol has. I might not agree with it. I am very critical of it. But I think part of what I'm hoping moving forward now with the Police Oversight Commission is that we do together. And, you know, we're going to be getting trained on the policies and practices, the major like buckets of categories of policies that, you know, we want to dive into. But what I'm hoping is you mentioned that, you know, every year around December, you know, you get a list of different changes from Lexipol based on the different state laws that are, you know, being passed. And so kind of hoping that the Police Oversight Commission is involved in some of that review of new policies that come in, whether it's, you know, a formal process where, you know, at the beginning of the year, you know, you give us, hey, here's a list of new policies that are coming down, here's what Lexipol has, here's what we are adopting, you know, what changes might have be adopted from Lexipol, customizations, just so that the Police Oversight Commission has an opportunity to also weigh in as an extra set of eyes in this. So that's something that I'm hoping that we get to do in partnership with you. You know, and ultimately, you know, it's more of a comment. Monopolies are bad. The monopolies are bad for the economy, not for anything. So unfortunately, we do have one here, and it's a corporation, right? We purchase, it's something that we purchase, and so you know, I understand all of that. So thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Commissioner Castillo-Latson.
I just have a couple follow-ups. So first, I want to ask you about the policy implementation process. So you had a slide that talks about all the steps that you go through in implementing a policy from Lexipol.
Yes, sir.
How long does the process take from start to finish? Like from when you receive a policy from Lexipol to the time that it's actually implemented?
So the answer to that question is it depends. What I found early on is it was largely dependent on who gets back to me once I give them the policy to review and how quickly they can get it back to me. Conceivably, it could be done as quickly as 2 weeks if everybody's really on the ball. It also depends on how much we believe that the policy should be modified. Whether we believe we need to take this to the community or in the future, we need to bring it to this board for review. The good thing is now is that all of our new policies or that transition is done. So we're looking at a lot less work than when I'm trying to do 182 right from the get-go and start from scratch. Generally speaking, early on, it would take a minimum of about 60 days. And part of that was because we would send them to the bargaining unit just for review and for an opportunity to raise any issues, and I would give them 45 days to respond. I never had them challenge me on anything, so at 45 days, they would get published. But when you're looking at the initial review process, and then just 45 days of me sitting around waiting to hear if they're gonna gripe about it.
Okay, so it sounds like from the time that you get a recommendation or an updated policy from Lexipol, the goal is to get it implemented as quickly as possible?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, policy updates are a different story. Because policy updates only go from the manual administrator to the legal advisor, I've pushed out policy updates in 7 days, which has to happen, particularly along December. So kind of to this member's desire to be involved. Some of those, generally speaking, we don't get the policy updates until about the second week in December, and laws go into effect January 1. So there may be an instance where we have to go ahead and push the policy forward, publish it, then kind of work it backwards and have this board review it, and if we're gonna make modifications. Because what we don't wanna do as an organization, as a city, is be caught without an updated policy when there's been a law change.
Sorry, what were we talking about before? I thought we were talking about policy updates.
You said
Oh.
implementation. So I considered that to be a new policy. So a new policy is anywhere from 60 days. Granted, our goal is to get it pushed through, but now that all new policies have already been done, unless we have a new policy come up, that'll generally be a 60-day turnaround.
Okay, so I'm curious about the procedure that happens when Lexipol informs you of some update that they want to make to their policies, right?
Correct.
That process takes 7 days? Is that what you were saying earlier?
I've done it as quickly as 7 days.
As quickly as 7 days. Okay,
Yes.
so it moves generally very quickly.
Yes, because the base policy has already been approved, already been vetted. Now, when it goes to the police legal advisor, they only have to review that section that was updated.
Okay. So that was my next question. So the policies that Lexipol pushes out to the Santa Ana Police Department, they get reviewed by a legal advisor?
Correct.
Is that person an attorney?
Yes.
They are, okay. And in terms of policies from Lexipol, I know one of the big, reasons behind hiring Lexipol is to try to mitigate risk, and I totally understand that. Does the police department maintain data about lawsuits or litigation from pre-Lexipol as compared to post-Lexipol hiring? Like, do you have information about that?
I don't have that information. That would be information that the city attorney's office would more than likely have. But we don't keep that information in-house. A lot of times, the training division's not really even involved in that, other than providing documents.
Okay. And one last question. So I know in the PowerPoint presentation, it says that I think about 40% of Santa Ana Police Department's policy book has been modified. Did that happen? Are those policies that existed at the time that the city or the police department hired Lexipol? Meaning, like, did those changes the policies that you modified happen as part of the transition, or is it kind of like an ongoing thing? Meaning, I guess what I'm getting at is when Lexipol recommends a policy update, how often does the city push back on it and make modifications?
So the 40% is just in the base manual when we got it and we implemented them. When we do a policy update, it does not log in the system as a policy modification. The policy modifications are logged in the sense that it's a modification that we made. So if Lexipol sends us an update, that doesn't show as a modification. Did I answer your question there?
Yeah, so Lexipol sends you an update, the police department an update.
Correct.
If the police department decides that they don't like the policy or that they want to modify it, and they do, is that tracked somehow?
Yes, it's tracked within the KMS system.
Okay, is the 60-40 split, does that encompass those changes that we just talked about? Or do you have data as describing the percentage of policies that have been modified by the police department after like having transitioned to Lexipol?
I would have to look.
Okay.
I would have to research that for you. I based the 40% off of there's a reporting
original.
module
Yeah.
within KMS that told me that 40% of the manual. It seems like we've done a lot of modifications just because I've read every single one of them.
Okay, yeah, I mean, if that information exists, I think it would be helpful. I think part of the concern with Lexipol is that I think, people would be concerned about the police department just adopting whatever Lexipol says, kind of taking it as gospel and just implementing it without really thinking about it critically and making changes as necessary. So I think if there is data about how often the police department pushes back on policies that Lexipol pushes out, it would be good to know.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd have to look. Let me think about it, and I'll figure out a way to get that information.
All right, thank you.
If I may real quick too,
Sure.
one of the other areas or the things that the department does to also try to kind of help with that mindset or thought that, these policies require a little bit extra scrutiny, that's why we put them online as well. If there is a policy, we post them online, they're available for folks to look at, and, our council members, our community members, they're able to, through this legislative process, come to their elected officials to say, hey, why is Santa Ana PD doing that? Why do we have that policy? And again, but I will remind you, our policies are centered on state and federal law. And so to the extent that we can say, hey, we're not going to do that, doesn't happen very often. There was an instance where there was a discrepancy with some language used that might have been in conflict. And so we pushed back on that one. We essentially kind of alerted Lexipol, hey, you guys are interpreting this wrong. They looked into it further and go, you're right. And it was modified and adjusted for every Lexipol customer. So, another area for the community to really evaluate our policies is online. They're available there for everyone to look at.
Quick question to you on the Lexipol. Am I being clear on this, that they're primarily law changes, or what are they primarily, the changes that you're seeing from Lexipol, these that come through? Are they a change in the law? Because you're saying policy. Are they based on, to your example, a lawsuit that took place in San Francisco?
In some instances, they are based on what we call case law, and in some instances, most instances, they're actually based on legislative changes.
Okay.
And that's the reason why we get updates. What they'll do is if there's a broad legislative change, then they'll also go back and review other aspects of the policy themselves. And sometimes they'll find things that it's, to a certain degree, it becomes frustrating because what they do is they scratch out any changes I made to make it specific to my department. So then I have to do it all manually and update the legislative stuff, but keep the department-specific stuff. But that's kind of getting in the weeds on it. But yeah, to your question, it's either going to be case law changes or actual legislative changes that are the lion's share of the updates.
Okay, and so to be clear, they're not coming along and say, hey, Santa Ana, you guys need to do this because we think it's a good idea. Their changes are coming out because the law has changed or the legislature says, hey, this is what needs to be done. Am I correct in that? Or the other example would be a case law where somebody sued and won, that type of thing. but they're not really dictating you your day-to-day business, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
There is one exception I will give you, and it's actually an exception for the better. There is no state law that requires a foot pursuit policy. As a result of a death up in Sacramento, the recommendation was that everybody adopt a foot pursuit policy. Within 2 months, I had a foot pursuit policy from Lexipol that I could vet, which looks very similar as far as the guidelines as a vehicle pursuit. You know, we need to have logical reasons why we're chasing these people. So that's an instance where they implemented a policy and pushed it out to us that was a best practice thing, not governed by state or federal law, but hey, this is what they're recommending makes sense, and this is what we should adopt ourselves.
Understood, but that's, again, as a recommendation, you could have said, yeah,
We could have.
right? I
But
mean-
we, in theory, we could do that with the entire manual.
No, I understand that, but again, I think the point being is the updates they're giving you typically are laws, are law-driven, correct?
Yes.
They're not just suggestions that they think are a good idea.
Correct.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gorinsky, did you have any further questions? No? Okay. So it sounds like Lexipol kind of gives you like the framework, the baseline for you guys to go base off of that. And then depending on what our community needs are, then you guys will adjust that as needed, correct?
That's an accurate description.
Okay, thank you. So I think it's time for a break. I'm going to go ahead and recess the meeting for 15 minutes.
Okay. Oh, my goodness.
I was gonna say, yeah. You still want to? Okay. No, absolutely. Yeah, just let me know. No, it's okay. We just want to make sure that, when you do, just let me know. I get it, trust me, I know, so, I mean, hey, the good thing is,
Madam Recording Secretary, are we ready to restart?
Yes, Chair Vega.
Okay, so this meeting is resumed. The time is 7:30 p.m. and we are going to be continuing with item 2 on the agenda. I believe we have a comment from Assistant City Attorney.
Yes, hi, everybody. So I just wanted to just give a brief friendly reminder about the Brown Act. I did note, and again, this is a friendly reminder, I did note that there were a series of commissioners on the break speaking with staff, and we do need to always be mindful about those types of numbers, those types of congregations. I did not observe any Brown Act violation, so I just want to let you know that that's not what this is about, but we do need to be very careful when, if say 4 commissioners were speaking with staff about city business and the cameras aren't rolling and we're not on the record, that it would be a Brown Act violation. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you for that reminder.
Can I just ask a follow-up? When you say staff, does that encompass police officers?
Yes, it would.
Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna continue on with the training.
All right, thank you very much. The last slide I'm going to cover talks about Power DMS. What Power DMS is very similar to the Knowledge Management System, or KMS. This is more specifically a training management system, i.e. a training documentation system. So when somebody goes to a class, whether that be in-house or an external class, they'll receive a certificate of completion for this class. It all gets documented in Power DMS. Basically, it's our clearinghouse for training material. That way, when we do have either litigation, oftentimes when somebody's going through a promotional process, they say, hey, can I get my training record? When they're talking about their training record, they're talking about Power DMS. So it allows us to store, organize, create, and disseminate and track policies. We also keep a version of our published policies in Power DMS. And you might say to yourself, this sounds like duplicate effort, and I can tell you it very much is duplicated effort, and there's a reason behind it. Because Power DMS uses a forward-facing, i.e. a public viewing portal, as it were, when I post a policy in Power DMS, it automatically shows up in our website. So it minimizes the labor. I don't have to send, the way we were doing it before was I would print out a PDF version of our policy. I would send it to our webmaster. Our webmaster would create a page. They would dump the policy on there. Well, then 2 weeks later, I get a policy update. So now I got to reach out to the webmeister, or whatever you call them, have them remove the old policy, put on the new one. The advantage of Power DMS is as soon as I put up the new policy, the old one goes to archive, and the link is automatically created on our website, which is a huge benefit. We also use it to push out, while we use KMS to push out policy updates, we use KMS to push out legal updates. And what I mean by legal updates is, like I mentioned before, our police legal advisor is constantly monitoring case law, things going on in the courts. When a case comes up, and typically it'll be, oftentimes it's related to search and seizure, or it's related to some form of what was being contested, an arrest that was being contested in court. She will review that case, then create a legal update that basically gives a one over the world of the case, some talking points as it relates specifically to our agency and specifically to our community, and then things that we need to be watching out for as best practice stuff. We push those out via Power DMS, and it's very similar to KMS. It requires an electronic acknowledgement and signature. Again, this system is audited on a monthly basis to ensure that everybody is staying up to date on those policies, or sorry, those legal updates that we push out. While legal updates are not put out on our public website because they're considered attorney-client privilege, all of our policies and procedures are put on our website via Power DMS. And just as a food for thought, 5,000 agencies across the United States use Power DMS. It is actually one of the premier training management systems. They don't create policy, they just house whatever we have. And they retain their customers quite well. It actually was bought by a company called NeoGov, which the city uses in-house for its application process and evaluation process. And we also run our field training program through NeoGov, as well as, actually, that's just it, our field training program through NeoGov. So it's kind of nice, we have one system that does all this other, has multifunctionality even into the city level. Any questions on that?
Have our subject matter experts within the department, at any division, any traffic division, domestic investigations, like to share this new information. That type of a topic, it's a system that is effective for us to be able to provide and disseminate that information immediately to everybody. Get acknowledgement that they received it, get acknowledgement that they received it, and then for the accountability, and then we log it as well. We'll get into the mandates and, what's mandated and so forth, but this is, additional. You'll hear Sergeant Sontag will, shortly be talking about the mandates and so forth, but we go above and beyond the mandates, and this system, in addition to it, is also frequently utilized as well.
Go ahead.
Commander Sorensen, so earlier you mentioned that police officers had access to policies, they could access them from their phones.
Correct.
Is this the system that you're describing?
No,
Oh, it's different.
this is a secondary system, but they also have access to this
Oh,
via their
okay.
phones.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. One follow-up. The prior system that you were describing, that is part of Lexipulse functionality?
Correct.
Okay.
All right, I'll turn it over to Sergeant Sontag, who'll get into the next.
Thank you, Commander.
All right, good evening once again. We'll be covering kind of POST. The way I'd kind of frame POST, for those of you that are not familiar with it, it stands for Peace Officers Standards and Training, and that's pretty much what it is. View it almost as a certifying body. It's not a requirement that a police agency belongs to POST or, I guess, follows the rules and regulations or the recommendations of POST, but they incentivize us to do so. Sometimes the way that's done is certain classes are POST certified and we get compensated, or a portion of the tuition is given back to the department or the city for us attending those courses. All right, there's certain requirements that we do have to, in order to us to stay in compliance with POST, that we do have to follow. And part of those have to do a lot with training, which is why we have such a close relationship in the training division with POST, okay? They started in 1959, and initially it was just to set almost a guideline or standards for how we are gonna recommend or do policing in the state of California. In 2021, given a lot of the social unrest and some of the things that were going on, both within and outside of law enforcement, they started to go towards more of that certifying aspect of it, and now they're allowed to certify police officers, suspend police officers, and decertify police officers. So that's a different board that POST oversees, and that's one of the functions that POST now has that wasn't necessarily something that they did at inception, but has been seen by society as a necessary aspect of it. So POST now takes that into account. And again, it's not mandatory, it's just voluntary. We've been a part of POST since I've been there, and to my knowledge, the entire time since POST came into existence, okay? Now, with POST, I said that we have a close working relationship. Again, a lot of POST deals with the standards of law enforcement within the state of California. So we have certain mandates that we have to meet within the training division and the amount of training hours that we require or give to our officers. So up on the board, you'll see a roster of all of us, in essence, from the top down, starting with Deputy Chief Gonzalez over there, our training commander who you've met this evening, Commander Lazardi, myself as the sergeant. We have two different training coordinators. Corporal Dave Juarez kind of oversees a lot of our pursuits. Our officer involves traffic collisions. That's one of the functions or the ancillary assignments that he holds within that training aspect. And then Corporal Gary Ayala does more of our firearms-based stuff, less lethal munitions. While those are the functions, we kind of all piggyback off of one another. So if, for example, Corporal All is not available, the point is one of us is going to be able to step in because we all wear numerous different hats. Now we all have our specializations within training, but in essence, we can all work with one another or for one another should the need arise. We also have a Academy TAC officer who's assigned full-time to the Orange County Sheriff's Academy. And in this situation, it's Corporal Valdez, and her role is a TAC, teacher advisor coach. And in essence, it's similar to almost a drill instructor, and that is her function to prepare our recruits when they get hired from the Santa Ana Police Department. They go to the Orange County Sheriff's Academy. She is our liaison over at the academy to make sure that they're living up to the standards of the Santa Ana Police Department and to make sure that they're going to pass the Orange County Sheriff's Academy, which is a long, arduous program, over 900 hours of training goes into that program. Then we have our range master who does nothing but our firearms, less lethal munitions. He's full-time, he does nothing but the range. And we also have video production. All he does is video production. Sometimes it's for training, sometimes it's for outside of training, but everybody, when we need a video shot, that's the individual we go to, that's our in-house expert, and he's under the training umbrella, if you could see it that way. And we have a couple senior office assistants. Typically, their functionality is to make sure we are able to attend the courses, whether it's mandatory training, because maybe we brought somebody new to a instructor cadre, or maybe it's just, hey, there's a leadership course that I'd like to go to. They make sure that we are able to attend, reach out to whatever organization is putting on the training. And at the same time, if we're putting on training, because we do host a number of courses through our agency at the Santa Ana Police Department, they are the ones who allow those individuals in and coordinate with the training divisions of the other agencies who are going to be attending. So what we do in a nutshell, per post, Peace Officer Standards and Training, there's a certain number of hours that we have to meet as far as a threshold that's mandatory training for us to stay in compliance with post. Every single officer is mandated to meet those. And then there's different subsets or different requirements for different topics that we'll cover. And I believe the next slide is going to cover that into slightly more detail. So I'll kind of hold off on that. Just kind of wanted to mention it before I continue on. It's one of those situations, it's mandatory. We have to, in order to stay compliant with post, that's where we get those mandatory hours from, okay? The field training program falls under training as well. So in essence, I mentioned Corporal Valdez over at the academy. When a recruit graduates, they get sworn in as a peace officer. Now the training doesn't stop because they have 6 months of field training. So training, we not only oversee the field training officers, who it is their function and job to make sure that those recruits can be competent solo patrol officers able to function on their own in the field. That's their job, so we oversee them. At the same time, we also oversee the recruits themselves, and that would be Corporal Jimenez, who oversees the FTO program. We have the Orange County Sheriff's Training Academy, which is one of the partners. We have somebody assigned there, and again, that's just a nice working relationship that we have that's relatively cohesive between the two organizations, again, to make sure that our recruits are getting the best training that they possibly can, more ready to pass that FTO program, because it's relatively arduous to be able to pass that. We also have an in-house, it's a virtual simulator. We partnered and received a grant from UASI. We house the simulator. My hope is at some point in time, the plan is that you will all be able to utilize the simulator as a function of training, and it's numerous different scenarios. It's a hexagonal shape, I believe 6 panels, and what it is, it's relatively immersive. When you stand in there, there's only one panel that you don't see, and that's kind of behind you. So like I said, it's relatively immersive, and you can kind of get caught up in it. The individual who's controlling the scenario has the ability depending on how you're reacting, to change the scenario. So it can be something as simple as, hey, sir, would you mind picking up your stuff and leaving? You know, the business owner would like you to leave. And if they've explained everything, why they're there, they haven't come too militaristic, they're humanized, they're that back and forth with the individual, we can have the individual be compliant all the way up until sometimes presenting a weapon and seeing how the officer reacts to that. Okay, and then depending on how they react, depending on what weapon system or force option they decide to choose, we can still change the outcome relatively quickly. Again, that's what the simulator is there for. It's just another mechanism of control. Understanding SB 230, the Senate bill that we have to adhere to, kind of requires us to make sure that we don't use simulators to suffice for all of our training requirements. They like the more hands-on approach, the practical application approach, the scenario-based training, which is the vast majority of it. But a lot of times the simulator is good when we notice a trainee is struggling with a certain situation, whether it's how they talk to people, how they interact with people. We can now put them in an environment which is 100% safe, and it allows them to kind of maneuver around and still get the training aspects without the unfortunate aspect of doing it in a field experience where they can actually fail and either have a bad taste left in the mouth of the citizen and or the public that viewed the incident. It's kind of a safe haven that we can utilize and we have in the past. We also have different courses that we host. Again, I run our defensive tactics cadre. We have a 1-day, what we call controlling force. We have a 3-day, which is an advanced controlling force. And then we have a 10-day where agencies will send their officers who they select to be defensive tactics or arrest control technique instructors at their agency, and they will come get certified by us. About a year ago, we got audited by Post. Peace Officer Standards and Training came and watched that course and gave us feedback on that course. And to my knowledge, I think we're running at about 50% of courses that they audit, they will what they call decertify. In other words, you did not live up to the standards that you set in your expanded course outline or the standards that we have as Post. Therefore, we are decertifying your course. You can no longer teach it. We passed that certification process through Post for that 10-day instructor course. And again, I think one of the reasons we're all here is use of force. And that course is, in essence, teaching somebody how to be a use of force instructor. So needless to say, the eyeballs were on, and we had 2 auditors the entire time, and again, we passed that. So again, one of the functions that our training division does, not only do we teach our own officers, but we teach other officers as well. And then as things progress, roll call training. Sometimes that coincides with some policy updates or maybe some legal updates that have come out. We will give roll call training. An example of that, when the Tyree Nichols situation occurred, we did roll call training on how we viewed the situation and what we recommend as far as use of force tactics, techniques. How do we not get into a situation where we end up in those optics? So that's one of the things that we've done as far as the roll call trainings, and we do that depends on some of the case law that has come out or some of the new occurrences, some of the things that have taken place. So to get into the mandatory training, this is all kind of ancillary stuff. Yes, it's mandatory, but this is the stuff I'm about to refer to right now. This is all dictated by Post, the Peace Officer Standards and Training, in order for us to stay certified and within compliance for Post. So the way that we did it, it used to be done in a not so regimented way. It was, you would get your 12 hours of training, and it would just happen to fall on whatever day it was. When Commander Sorensen took over, he streamlined the process. Rather than having certain individuals go through training at certain times, and there was no rhyme or reason, I could be going with somebody I'd never worked with. Commander Sorensen came in, realized the imperative nature of going to training, especially with individuals you work with. So in part of that streamlining, you would now go to that training and you would be with your team or your patrol team. Or if it's a specialized unit, typically half of that specialized unit would go to training while the other half does whatever their typical daily functionality is. So that was one of the streamlining aspects of it. So now we have it twice a year, once in the spring, once in the fall. It's usually 4 to 5 weeks, depending on how many individuals we can put through training at one time. Sometimes that's based off of logistical aspects, such as there's certain requirements by Post as far as student to instructor ratios that we have to be cognizant of. At the same time, understanding a lot of us are ancillary assignments as instructors. So we can't drop the ball on our day job. We still have to adhere to those requirements as well. So sometimes it's 4 weeks, sometimes it's 5 weeks, and oftentimes it's done at the police department, but there are times when we use Centennial Regional Training Center as an off-site location, just because of the things that we can do there that we can't necessarily do in our department. An example of that is some of our slow speed maneuvers. So backing of cars, they'll do tracks out there that is all slow speed because the vast majority of our traffic collisions occur at slow speeds. So they set up cone patterns out there. If you haven't seen our police department, the back area behind our police department where all of our vehicles go out, we just don't have the space we would need to do those trainings at that location. So that's why we kind of do it at the offsite areas. We have an agreement with the Santa Ana College. It's more of a partnership. It's the instructional service agreement. And what that is all of the training that we put on, provided it falls in line. So not only do we have the post aspect of it, we also have the Santa Ana College aspect of it. So it's almost one best practices and the other, in essence, almost an educational aspect of it because it is partnered with the college. And that's an agreement with them to make sure that all of the courses that we teach are in line with, again, the educational aspect of it. And it's just a service agreement that we have with Santa Ana College. It's a long-going partnership. Some of the courses, all of the mandatory courses that we teach are part of that service agreement. And then we have some ancillary, for example, those defensive tactics courses that we teach, those are also in line and agreed upon with Santa Ana College, and we've partnered with them for that as well. Most of the courses that we teach, we do in partnership with Santa Ana College and Post. Again, I mentioned the scenario-based training. That's a mandatory aspect or a mandatory component of not only Post requirements, but almost best practices. You kind of see once you start doing the scenario-based training, it's a lot more realistic than sitting in a classroom in a stagnant, docile environment where you have no outside influences and things are going to go relatively smoothly. You can only do so much in a classroom. You got to kind of get out there and do it in an actual training environment, and we do that a lot at our agency. So if you look on the right-hand side, those are all the mandatory requirements that we have to teach to. So again, if you look at it, it starts on, let's say, for example, this cycle that we're in right now started on January 1st of 2023. So we are halfway through that 2-year cycle. As of now, we've covered the arrest control, strategic communications, firearms, less lethal, domestic violence, bias-based policing. First aid and CPR, we do not teach in-house. We have a partnership with the Orange County Sheriff's Academy, or I'm sorry, the Orange County Sheriff's Department, and our officers go there for an 8-hour block of first aid and CPR. Reason being, it's relatively inexpensive, and we don't have anybody at our location that would be able to take on that logistical component and yet still keep their day job, whatever that assignment may be. So that's why we partnered with the Sheriff's Department for that. And then so we have the vast majority of those have already been covered, and we still have an upcoming cycle. The upcoming cycle will be getting taught in spring. And on that one, we're looking at driver training and awareness, vehicle pursuits, and I don't recall what the other portion of the training is going to be. But again, that's getting set up. Oh, you know what? That's going to be building searches, which isn't mandatory. That's just one of the things that we can kind of throw on. Again, we try and make this a 10 to 12-hour training day to be able to, number one, suffice for the mandatory amount of time that we have to spend on a particular topic. But number two, make sure that the students understand it. There's usually a testing component or some kind of demonstrative component to that training so that the student or the instructor knows that the actual information that was supposed to be passed on was in fact passed on. So we have mandatory topics that we have to cover, and then we have other topics that we just make sure, again, we have an influx of officers come in during those 2 years in between trainings. So let's make sure that we're all doing the same tactics when it comes to building searches, something to that nature, because again, we go to a lot of false alarms where we may have to clear a building. Let's make sure everybody knows what everybody's doing. And that's just kind of like a best practices within our organization. So that's one of the ancillary trainings that we put on as well. And then,
Excuse me, thank you, Sergeant. I wanted to jump in here. I know we had slated this time for more of a legal review and analysis. I did want to interject, though, that the legal portion of this training is going to be provided by Jim Touchstone. I believe I had mentioned him in previous commission meetings. He is from the law firm, he's a partner at the law firm of Jones and Mayer, and he will be providing specific training and legal guidance with regard to constitutional rights and civil liberties, procedural rights and confidentialities afforded to police officers. That is commonly referred to as POBAR, the Police Officers Bill of Rights. Excuse me. He will also be touching on state use of force standards, so the state of California's use of force standards, police union contracts, and labor rights. So again, I do appreciate, Sergeant, your willingness to go through, again, the legal issues, search and seizure, that type of thing, but we have specially designated Jim Touchstone to discuss those matters, and he is a licensed attorney, and he has a great deal of experience and a wide breadth of knowledge in those areas.
that being said, thank you, sir. What questions do we have about anything, any portion that I covered?
Okay, so now I'm gonna open it up. I'll start to my right, commissioners. Commissioner Castillo-Lawton.
Okay, I have some questions.
Yes, sir.
So the mandated yearly training, am I correct in understanding that that happens, the topics are all covered once a year, but they're split between two separate trainings, is that right?
The topics on the right are the mandatory topics we have to cover per peace officer standards and training in order for us to stay in compliance. We have 2 years to get through all of those mandatory topics because of the logistical components of the work hours that we work. Typically, those training days are anywhere from 10 to 12 hours. So some of the mandated timeframes, we can get several different topics in per day. So what we tend to do is we'll cover several different topics on a day, depending on what those timeframes are. Once that has been sufficient on that particular day, we will now clear that. We'll probably have a makeup day to make sure that if anybody was injured, out sick, whatever the case is, we cover their makeup day, and then we'll move on to the next, whatever that training session is gonna be. So typically it's in the spring and the fall, which gives us 4 training sessions within that 4-year cycle, at least 4 training sessions within that 2-year cycle, I'm sorry.
So just to confirm, so the topics on the right, like arrest and control, use of force, et cetera, those have to be covered once, within a 2-year period for any given police officer.
Yes, sir.
And the trainings you host biannual trainings,
Twice
right?
a year.
Twice a year.
Yes, sir.
That cover some of these topics over a period of 2 years. So 2 biannual trainings, that's 4 in total. And across those 4, you cover all of these topics.
Correct.
Okay. I have a question about arrest and control, and I think the earlier slide was techniques and defensive tactics. Can you explain what those are? Like what do they entail?
So arrest and control is the way that it's framed when you talk about post. Post refers to it as ACT. The Orange County Sheriff's Department refers to it as ACT. Our agency refers to it as defensive tactics. It's relatively the same thing. In essence, what it is all of the laws applicable and the techniques applicable to any kind of use of force situation.
So they're not actually, so you're just going over the laws?
The laws and the techniques.
And the techniques, okay.
So typically in the arrest control, that's more of your technique-based. However, we don't simply just cover techniques. There's always a legal component to it, because you have to understand, you can have all the techniques in the world, but if you're not on a legal foundation, it's not exactly where we want to be. The use of force portion is much more legal-based driven as opposed to technique driven.
I see. Do you have a sense of, from a percentage standpoint, how much time is spent on each of these topics over those 2 years?
So off the top of my head, arrest and control, the mandatory amount is 4 hours. Use of force, 4 hours. Driver training and awareness, 4 hours. Vehicle pursuit, 1 hour. Strategic communication, 2 hours. Firearms, 4 hours. Less lethal, 4 hours. Domestic violence, 2 hours. Bias-based policing, I believe it's an hour, maybe 2. Actually, I think that one's 2 hours. First aid and CPR, I believe the requirement is 4, although, like I said, we do an 8-hour block on that day. And then the LGBTQ awareness, I believe, is an hour, and that one's every other year as well.
So if we look at the slide before, yeah, so there's a slide that says arrest control techniques, defensive tactics. It says 1-day course, controlling force, 3-day course, advanced controlling force, 10-day course, ACT/DT instructor course.
Yes, sir.
How does that fit into what you just described?
So that's not a mandatory component. So in essence, what we do is typically we will offer the 1-day course several times a year, 3-4 times a year. And that's just, if the officer wants to take it, it's not mandatory by any stretch of the imagination. Sometimes we do have individuals that have to take it because of a training recommendation, but for the most part, that's our officers who want to be there, want the extra training. And then that's also open to other police agencies as well. So this page, if one of our officers does not want to take any of these 3 classes, there is no nexus, there's no mechanism that they have to take those classes. These are ancillary or additional should they want it.
I see. So the only mandated training for arrest and control and use of force are the 4 hours for each, I think, that you described? Okay.
Yes,
And
sir.
then you supplement that with this other training on arrest control techniques and defensive tactics, but that is not mandatory.
Correct.
Okay. Are police officers in Santa Ana, are they required to take any like grappling courses or things like that, like wrestling or jiu-jitsu?
There is no requirement. However, we do have, to my knowledge, the only in-house jiu-jitsu program, which I'm one of the instructors of that as well. So in essence, the way that we're running it right now, obviously the days kind of change because we're about to next week go into a new deployment. So all of the instructors potentially could be moving to different areas. As of right now today, we have a 6 a.m. class Monday through Friday. Tuesday, Friday, and Saturday, we have an additional 4 p.m. class. And those are all taught by the requirements for that. Most of all of the instructors are defensive tactics instructors except for one who's a black belt. And the requirements for that is, as far as the instructor level, is you have to be a purple belt or above. And that's not necessarily a requirement from our agency, that's a requirement from the jiu-jitsu gym that we partner with.
Okay. But this isn't mandated.
It is not mandated, no.
Has there been discussion to mandate training like that?
It's always something that we're willing to look at. As of now, like I said, we're looking, the last numerics that I ran, we are approaching 1 in 4 officers are already training. So we're about 23% of our agency who's currently training in some form or fashion within that jiu-jitsu program. Whether that becomes a mandatory aspect of it, that's beyond my, I guess, sphere of influence.
Have there been talks about it?
I have not had talks with anybody about that.
It seems like it would be a good idea for a police officer to be trained in grappling. I mean, when you're restraining somebody, that's what you're doing, right?
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback or give you a little more information, excuse me, the term that's used a lot right now is de-escalation. And so the ability to essentially grapple with someone and use alternative measures to control someone, to take control of them if they're resisting, that is an option. I don't know if, because I went to Chicago and I went to their training center, and when I was out there, Chicago very much wants to incorporate a program that we've done here. Our leadership, the question that Vice Chair Carpenter asked about, is training top down or bottom up? I would say that it's across the board, because that initiative, the rollout of our de-escalation training center, which is we essentially carved out a section of the police department downstairs by the gym that is solely dedicated to grappling, boxing, other alternative techniques that officers can learn to be able to control individuals who are resisting and whatnot. Chicago Police Department, huge police department. Their management doesn't want to, because they think it'll escalate instances of use of force. But what we see here is it essentially provides an additional level of confidence for the officers that should the incident result in some sort of struggle or confrontation that ends up on the ground where most fights do, the officer has the skills necessary to overcome that resistance and essentially take the person into custody. So it's a conversation, but each agency across the nation views it differently. We here see it as a valuable tool to help prevent that higher escalation use of force. And it also, like I said, it also provides that confidence boost for our officers that they can handle themselves out on the field should they need to.
And to piggyback off of that, the way we kind of viewed it when we were coming up with this program, there's 3 options that you have if you want to implement jujitsu. One of the options is like what the Orange County Sheriff's Department does. What they do is they give tuition reimbursement to all of the officers who go to a jujitsu gym. They have to provide a receipt. They have to get it signed off by a particular sergeant over there saying that, yes, I recognize this as a jujitsu or a location that teaches jujitsu. That's one way to do it. The issue with that, actually, let me go forward and then I'll go back. The other option that you have is something like Marietta, Georgia, or Pasadena, where you partner with the gym, your officers, the department pays for it, and your officers are able to go there and train. The issues with those two, as me as an individual of the organization, I have no say-so into what's being taught. I have no implementation of what's the curriculum going to be, how it's going to be taught, who's teaching it, what's the expertise level of this individual. In ours, there's only, I think, 5 or 6 of us that are teaching right now in that program. And all of us, again, there's only one who's not a defensive tactics instructor, and the only reason he's not is because he's one of our canines, and he can't have multiple ancillary assignments. Otherwise, he'd be on our cadre. But again, that's a black belt. So that's kind of out of the norm, not the norm. Everybody else is a defensive tactics instructor, so it's just one more level of expertise that that individual can bring to that training that they provide.
Yeah, just going back to your point, I think jiu-jitsu is obviously very effective. I think it's great that the city of Santa Ana has a program where they encourage police officers to train in jiu-jitsu. It seems like it's a very helpful way to avoid using force if something escalates to the point of having to, engage somebody. I have a question about the training that you do. So the 4 hours of training that you do on once every 2 years, right? What, if anything, does the city of Santa Ana do to ensure that people who receive that training stay sharp? Do you know what I mean? Like, for instance, I box and I do jiu-jitsu. So if I take some time away from the gym, if I trained something, a month ago and then I haven't practiced it, when I have to use it in sparring or whatever, I'm not going to be as good at it, right?
Right.
And so does the city of Santa Ana have anything to, I guess, encourage people or require people to refresh their skills? Maybe it's not like the full 4-hour thing, but I don't know, maybe like live situation, like sparring situations or something like that?
So one of the things that we do is, I mentioned the roll call training. Sometimes that's because of an incident that we had where it was a use of force that maybe could have been handled in a different manner or with a different technique, where sometimes we will go to roll call training and provide that training. Maybe it's a half an hour before they go into the field. Sometimes that's done in that aspect of it. Other times, for example, I just talked to our motor sergeant. He does every single year, he will make sure he partners with our training division, and we put on specialized training for our motors. So sometimes it's the supervisor reaching out, and that's a training that we will facilitate, and we're more than willing to do it. That's our job in training, is to provide the individuals with the knowledge and skills that they need. And other times it's us going and being almost proactive in that training, in that roll call aspect of it.
Thank you.
Vice Chair, any? Go ahead.
How many dogs does the police department have now? How many police dogs?
I believe we have 6.
6 of them, oh, wow.
7, I'm
7.
sorry, 7.
7 plus what?
A bloodhound.
Bloodhound, okay. What is he finds people, bloodhound does?
She's usually for missing individuals.
Okay, interesting, thank
Real quick, on the mandatory yearly training, is this typically new or review?
Each training for the yearly is typically new. A lot of the times it's coinciding with whether it's a legal update, maybe it was a case that precipitated that legal update. Oftentimes it's just looking at current trends, what's being seen, what's being done in whatever field that we're teaching, and it's kind of a push out. It's constantly updating.
Okay, so it's just not
It's not
right in the
boiler-
mill.
It's
Great.
not boilerplate, no, sir.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I'll go to my left now. Any commissioners here? Commissioner Perea, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious about, so when you were talking about the simulators, you mentioned that if an officer needs additional training, it's a good way without harming individuals. I'm curious as to if the officer continues to make the same mistake during the simulators, like what are some of the procedures that are taken in place? Like, are there procedures set, or do they continue until they pass an exam?
So typically in a situation where we're going to use the simulator as a mechanism of training or trying to get somebody additional repetitions, the vast majority of the time, that's usually a trainee officer. So in essence, something necessitated us to do additional training with that individual, which has already been documented by the field training officer, who's then reached out to the FTO coordinator, Corporal Jimenez, and now we've gotten together as a training cadre and now put on some training. So our goal is for them to leave that day with a positive result. Now, the hope is that positive result will then be duplicated in the field in a real life situation. If, for example, it is not duplicated and we continue to have issues, then that's something that's going to get brought up again in a training aspect of it, where it's a trainee trying to become a full-time officer. It's a lot different set of circumstances than if it's a already seasoned officer. So I don't know if does that answer your question? It's not leeway. Typically, the reason I say a more seasoned officer is because they would have not passed training had they had issues in the beginning to allow them to get to that situation where now they have years on and there's still issues. Typically, that's something we try and mitigate at a very early onset, because sometimes it's not a fit for the organization. Sometimes it's not a fit for the individual. And that's no fault of us or them. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. And it's, again, we try and catch it early so that we don't have issues later. Issues later, again, you'll talk to legal, and that's where we get into POBAR and some issues to that nature. Whereas where it's a trainee officer, it's a lot easier to move on.
Would like for you to understand that, just like Sergeant mentioned about the simulator, just please recognize the fact that it's a variety of different types and methods in which we provide a training, right? So there's a lot of value, there's pros and cons to each type of the training that we provide, right? So if we only focused on simulator training, we would not be as effective, right? So we have to then provide real-based training, whether that be through simunitions, live drills and so forth, through actual going hands-on jujitsu and going into and really getting into those things. But so it provides the opportunity to cover other aspects that perhaps we couldn't necessarily go here. And the simulator, what it does, it really helps us focus on the thought process. It does typically tend to be more for the recruit, the newer level, to have the more of the decision-making, because they're new at it. They're just really kind of just learning, just to really engage and talk to people. So we're really focusing a lot of that, the communication aspect, the thought process behind it. We could pause it and say, what else, what other things could we consider here? Think about this. Let's try it this way. Replay, play it again. This occurred. Explain to it. Now articulate it, because that's half of it, right? Explain to me why you did what you did and so forth. So there's a lot of value to that, recognizing the fact that there's also the disadvantage, But if we feel that that individual is just continuously failing, I mean, that's typically on the newer level, like Sergeant Sontag mentioned, and then we have other ways to send them in different directions. The FTO program would dictate, they just won't make the FTO program. They won't become, as much as time and effort and investment we put in our officers, we have seen it, we will then, remove them. They just won't complete the probationary period, and that happens, unfortunately. But, yes, we do have those steps to, those measures. On the other level, say officers on the senior level, that they do so, and we feel that they may not be grasping it, then we could place them into another form. Does that make sense? So it's just a type method of providing that training. So I hope that kind of answers that question, but we definitely measure it, and we do hold them accountable to it.
Yeah, and that was mainly my question, like for a senior officer, somebody who has been in the training, right, for whatever reasons, things happen. If their behavior is changing, how they're engaging with the community, I was curious as to like if this was used as an alternative to address those situations and what mechanisms were in place to then address and mitigate that, or what are the consequences, right? But you answered that, so thank you.
Commissioner Pereira.
Thank you. And Sergeant Sontag, sorry for confusing the names. I have a couple questions, but I'll start first with the peace officer standards and training. There's a recent law, I mean, not so recent, but a couple years ago, that gave the legislature authorized to certify, suspend, decertify officers. Could you walk us through the process of when an officer is certified? Like what incident might prompt that? What takes place during that?
During the certification?
Yeah, well, what prompts the certification? What's the process from for an officer to be decertified? What will be the causes?
Be decertified?
Yes.
Typically, it's moral turpitude, lying, stealing. There's a number of different things that they look at, and that's something that's handled at that post level. They have an advisory commission very similar to what we have here, and they make that ruling once it's brought up, whether it's by the organization or by somebody else, some other kind of investigation. And they look into it, conduct an investigation. That individual is allowed to, in essence, plead their case, and it's decided upon by the commission.
So it's if the department brings that up to the board, is
Typically, my understanding of the way it occurs, if we fire an individual for a particular reason, that information is sent to post. Now, in essence, if that individual then wants to go try and get hired by another agency, that's going to be something that agency has to deal with post because of the fact that they were fired for a particular reason from our organization. And in essence, that's where that decertification aspect would come into account.
Thank you. The other questions that I have is on the mandated yearly training. Could you elaborate a little bit on what the bias-based policing training entails?
The bias-based, some of the mechanisms of the bias-based policing, we use Post. Post is, they author or they create certain videos and learning portals on their website that we utilize for the bias-based specifically. Again, that's just simply because they have a lot more experts than we do at our agency specific to bias-based policing. And they have numerous different agencies and entities that they reach out to create those videos. There's testing components embedded in those videos, and it's a several-hour process that the officer has to go through and pass with a certain percentile grade of the questions based on the video that they're watching. A lot of it is scenario-based stuff. It's just more in tune to like the simulator aspect of it, but not nearly as in-depth where it's an actual scenario. It's much more watching the video. Sometimes it's they're going to show you a set of circumstances and you're going to have to make a decision. Or they'll show a situation and you're going to have to name what kind of bias the officer was eliciting or demonstrating. So that one is usually updated by Post, and that's one of the ones that we actually utilize the Post portal because of how vetted that process is. It'd be much much easier because of the expertise that they have than to do it in-house.
Those do the same thing for our public. In addition to that, we have several instructors in our department that are certified for procedural justice and bias-based policing, for instance. I'm one of those, right? So we have several folks within the organization that we have. So although we have those, and depending, we don't like to, in training, we really stay away from just very standardized, always doing the same ways, right? The same steps. So that is a tool, a way where we could really focus. It's very comprehensive. It's already driven by post, so certified, it's acceptable. But then we also take it even further, where we have in-house classroom setting, where we'll have two instructors that have been certified, have gone through the instructor certification, and then we provide it to where we utilize it in a classroom setting environment, and we're actually very much, it's a very engaging, I mean, it's a great course because it could take simple conversation dialogue and really take it to different levels, which is awesome because we're stimulating dialogue and conversation, sticking to the points that we need to. So going back to the simulator and scenario different ways, in addition to that, we provide it as well.
And what are I think you mentioned like some of them are, but what are some of the topics that it cover? Does it entail bias around nationality, like language?
So remember, like we said, Maureen, we'll get into more of the details when specific topics. It goes back to like the techniques and so forth. I started early on with saying if there's certain questions of how to do those. This is more for giving you a general idea. Like I said, we'll have a lot of opportunity. We will make a note of it. Please make a note of that. We could go into in terms of, I could provide you a actual curriculum or at least topics that are discussed when we in doing so. But definitely those points that you covered amongst, a list of what is required as an instructor of what they recommend.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
So kind of piggybacking on what he said, so then we're going to be able to, are we going through all of these trainings? Will the commission be able to look into what these trainings entail? It seems like a lot of us are very, there's probably one or two or three that we find that we want more information on. So is it possible for us to get more information, maybe sit into a training, maybe look at the course out?
I think that's something that we could definitely look into as we kind of grow together. I think we already kind of got our hands slapped as we're all trying to learn together. So if that's something that we want to do and we can facilitate, then that would be something that I would look to the deputy chief and kind of go with his guidance on that, and then city council and Mr. Chairperson as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and what I'll say is, what you're receiving today is kind of the foundational basis for, how we do police work. And so I know I said earlier, which I apologize, that we were going to be covering use of force. Trust me, when we cover use of force, the questions that you have are probably going to be, way more. They're going to have a ton of questions. And we're prepared for that. But I think tonight's training and any other additional training, we're able to make this so that it's what you need. If you want to go through bias-based police training, we can facilitate that. But today's training is really designed to kind of give you just that foundational knowledge of why we do what we do, and then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of some of the training so that you guys are all prepared to look at, the various aspects of what you're going to be assigned to do down the road. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much. And that's what I was hoping to get more information on all of these trainings. And one other thing that dispatch, training for dispatchers, is that part of all this as well? What kind of training do dispatchers go through?
To my knowledge, I do not believe that dispatchers was included in the training outline that I had provided, but if that is something that really interests the commission here and you want to take a look at, I don't see any issues with it either, because our dispatchers do go through extensive training. They're also meet post requirements as it relates to those job functions as well. So if that's what the board would like to do, we can put something together to essentially educate you on that process as well.
Yes, I personally would want that because I do sometimes hear a lot of complaints from people, when they say something has happened and then they'll call and then and I'll ask them, so what did the dispatcher say? They're like, oh, what do you want us to do about it? They'll get those type of responses. And so I want to make sure that dispatch understands that when somebody's calling for something, even if it might be minute, maybe it might not be something that you guys can do or take care of, but the dispatcher has a better response other than, what do you want us to do about it? Why are you calling us? And I've heard that many times.
And I have also, the only thing I will say is our dispatchers are highly trained. They work in the busiest city in the county. The amount of work that they have to go through, no other dispatcher in this county, and they probably rival some of the big agencies as far as the activity. We'd be more than happy to facilitate that training. They are very well aware of, kind of that perception. I am working with our dispatchers to try to come up with ways to improve that. I will finish with this. It's not an excuse, it's a reality. When people call into dispatch, generally they're calling 911. And it's during those dark times in, the community members' lives that they want to report a crime, they want immediate help, and our dispatchers have to go through a process to work through the problem so that they can get the right resources to them. They want to make sure our officers get there quickly, get there safely, so that we can, properly address the issue at hand. The areas where, why are you calling me? I don't have a response to that. I don't have any excuse. What I will say, though, is we hire from the human race, and just like we all have bad days, so do they. I encourage the community members that if you do encounter that, call the watch commander, 100%. We will look into each and every instance where those allegations are made. We pride ourselves on serving our community, and again, if a dispatcher is having a bad day or a series of bad days, what can we as an agency do to help that dispatcher? Because we need them at their best all the time. So that's the only thing I can offer you on that one, but more than happy to provide whatever training you need.
Thank you for that.
If I may, just
have a-
briefly,
oh,
I'm sorry, I apologize. There's a couple points I just want to touch on. The first one is, I think Chair Vega would be very helpful to put on some sort of training with regard to dispatchers. I just want to point out that the ordinance itself did not mandate that training. That's not to say that it can't happen. Given the breadth of what we're dealing with in the ordinance, I'm wondering for the commission's consideration if that was something that would be best suited after we potentially get through some of the mandated items as a suggestion to this body. The second point I would bring up is just, if we are talking about giving staff direction, the proper procedure would be for the commissioner with the idea or the suggestion to make a motion that staff be directed to come back at some later point with training specific to dispatcher or whatever it may be, dispatcher issues, dispatcher training, that sort of thing. The motion would need to be seconded, and then a vote could occur on that if we're going to be talking about directing staff to come back. So again, Chair Vega, I think it's an excellent idea. I think our highly competent staff would be more than happy to put that on for this body. I just want to make sure that, again, given the time constraints, given what we're dealing with the code itself and the ordinance, if we could find maybe the best economical way to go about doing that, and then also making sure that we're doing it procedurally correct. That's mandated not only under the Brown Act, but under generally the rules that govern parliamentary procedure, if you will. So,
Thank you. Commissioner Gorenstein.
Yes. When did the police department, Deputy Chief, start this recording for 8344211? If you want so-and-so, push this button. If you want this so-and-so, push this button. And it took, what does it take, about 15 seconds to sit there and listen to that before I finally pushed button 5, I think. That's one of the most ridiculous things any police department can do, is when you have that main number for people to call, then put them on a recording. What kind of tragedy or whatever they're calling for. When did that happen and why?
That happened, thank you for the question. That happened, I want to say about, gosh, I don't know, 2, 3 months ago, maybe. And the reason behind it, unfortunately, is our agency, like many agencies across the country, are facing staffing shortages. And one of the main contributors that takes up a lot of the dispatcher times are dealing with the non-emergency calls. So the concept and the idea, which is not new, it's not novel. If you go to many agencies across the country, they've all kind of gone to this process because it is a little bit more efficient way to help our community members. If they got a traffic problem, we'll hit this number, we'll go to traffic. I know here for years, we have been kind of ingrained in the idea that if you pick up the phone and call the police department, you're going to talk to a live person. The problem is, the sad reality is, our dispatchers are also understaffed right now. We're working to, get them fully staffed, but this is one of the mechanisms that we put in place to try to help expedite, alleviate them from taking a lot of the non-emergency calls so that they could be there for the 911 calls. That is their number one priority, 911 calls. To the extent that we do get fully staffed in dispatch, maybe we reevaluate that. Up to this point, I haven't heard any negative feedback on the phone tree. But like I said, if we do get feedback, I know our chief and myself, we're fully committed to make whatever adjustments are necessary to improve service.
I thought that 911 calls came into a certain operator or two. Does it come in then to all of the operators there?
Within dispatch, there are different workstations, and each workstation has a different functionality, different responsibilities. I don't know exactly how many dedicated 911 operators there are, but you got to remember, aside from 911 call takers, you also have dispatchers who are communicating back and forth with our police officers. You have dispatchers who are fielding requests by police officers in the field to call for tow truck drivers, calling parents to come pick up their kids in the middle of the night. And so the job of a dispatcher, I could never do it. I just would not do it. I'm bald now. I would have been bald years ago if I was in there. They provide a tremendous service. And like I said, I acknowledge the fact that some community members sometimes feel they get some less than satisfactory service. And the job of a dispatcher is very difficult. But again, we're always open to make adjustments where needed. But the phone tree, that was really an opportunity for us to kind of get with the times. Because this idea of the phone tree, to be honest with you, I think was presented, gosh, I want to say like 2007. And we turned it down then because we wanted that personal touch. We value that personal touch, but we're in a different time. Staffing is a big issue right now. And so that's the why behind that decision.
I don't approve of it, but thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, sergeants and commanders, for the training. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Just in closing, I just want to thank you and take the opportunity and cover my point. But if there's anything in addition to that, on behalf of the training division, as the training division commander, in addition to obviously human resources, specific, not just to this, beyond, as said so, very much open. I said it from the beginning, very transparent, open to provide you with whatever information that you need. At this point, for the remaining of the training, anything that comes up, make a note of it, or through the process, and I could assure you that we will provide you with whatever information.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
All right, so that concludes the business calendar. We're going to move on to comments. Are there any comments from staff?
Chair Vega, we do not have any staff comments tonight. Thank you.
All right, so now we're going to move on to closing comments from commissioners. I'll start to my left. Is there any commissioners that would like to provide any closing comments? Commissioner Pereira.
Want to make a motion to have snacks? Just kidding. No, thank you.
Second. Any closing comments from my commissioners on the right? Commissioner Castillo-Latson.
I need a little sign that says, turn me on, turn me on, turn me on. Once again, and I truly mean it, and I know we all do too here, thank you so much for a wonderful job that you did tonight. You talk like you know what you're talking about. And thank you very much for all your time, spending the time here with us too.
I just want to say, Commander Lazardi, Commander Sorensen, Sergeant Sontag, thank you so much. I know I asked a lot of questions, and I appreciate you being patient and answering them. You did a great job. So thank you again. Really appreciate you being here. And I will say just one more time, I really think the City of Santa Ana Police Department should consider mandating grappling training like wrestling or jiu-jitsu. So just something to consider. Thank you.
Again, same, I'll express the same thing, thanks to you guys. To echo what my counterpart, Castillo-Lawton, has said, I do have a concern about Lexapro also, or Lexapol being a monopoly. I realize there's not much you can do about it, but I think it is something that needs to be thought about. And for staff, I had requested some information. I wonder if you could give me an update on that, timeframe on any of those. We could have getting going on that. And that's it for me. And again, thank you guys very much.
All right, so I just want to say Happy New Year to everyone. Welcome back. I also want to recognize that January 9th was National Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. So to the Santa Ana Police Department, I just want to say thank you. We appreciate you and the service you do for the community. That concludes my comments. With no further business before the commission, I hereby adjourn the commission meeting. The time is 8:36 p.m. The next meeting of the Police Oversight Commission is scheduled for February 8th, 2024 at 5 p.m.
Okay.
Recording stopped.